The wagon wheel cracked on a Tuesday, which was about the worst day of the week for something like that to happen. Cole Mercer heard it go, a sharp, ugly pop like a rifle shot, and felt the whole left side of the wagon lurch and drag. He hauled back on the reins before the axle could bite into the road, and the two horses, Old Pete and a younger gray he'd never gotten around to naming properly, stamped and blew and didn't understand why they'd stopped. Cole climbed down and walked around to look. The wheel had split clean through one of the spokes, and the rim had folded inward like a crushed tin cup. He crouched beside it and pressed his thumb against the brake. Dry rot underneath the paint. He'd noticed it 2 weeks ago and told himself he'd get to it. He hadn't gotten to it. "Well," he said, to nobody in particular. He was good at that. Talking to nobody. 3 years alone on a ranch will do that to a man. He stood up and looked around. He was on the north edge of Dry Creek, close enough to hear the town before he could properly see it. Voices. A crowd of some kind. He'd come in to pick up fencing wire and a new pair of work gloves, and now he was going to need a wheelwright on top of everything else. He figured he'd leave the wagon where it sat, unhitch Pete, and ride him in. The gray he'd tie to a post and come back for later. It took him about 10 minutes to sort all that out, and by the time he rode Pete down the main street of Dry Creek, the noise from the square was louder. Not a fight, exactly. More like a crowd that had gathered for entertainment and found something better than they expected. Cole wasn't curious by nature. He had work to do and not enough hours in the day to do it, and whatever was happening in the square was none of his business. He tied Pete to the rail outside Harmon's Hardware and went inside. The man behind the counter, a heavy-set fellow named Doug Harmon with a red face and an opinion about everything, was craning his neck toward the window. "You hear about the auction?" Harmon said without looking at Cole. "I need fencing wire. 200 feet if you've got it." "Oh, I've got it." Harmon still didn't look at him. "They're auctioning off the Hart widow, her and that girl of hers." Cole set his hat on the counter. "Say that again." "The Hart widow. You know the Harts? Had a place out on the Connolly Road, maybe 12 miles east. Husband died back in the spring. Fever, I think. Anyway, she's got no means, she's got a little girl, and she's carrying another one. Town council decided she's a burden on public resources." He shrugged, like this was weather. "So they're selling off the obligation. Somebody takes her on, they get use of her labor, and a county stipend through the winter. It's all legal." Cole looked at him for a moment. "It's legal." "Apparently." "She know about it? She agree to it?" Harmon finally looked at him. "I don't think that was part of the discussion." Cole picked his hat back up off the counter and walked out. Done. The square in Dry Creek wasn't much to look at on a good day. A dirt clearing between the land office and the feed store, with a water trough on one end and a wooden platform that got used for public notices and apparently this. Maybe 40 people had gathered. Some of them Cole recognized. Ranchers, shopkeepers. A few women standing at the edges with their arms crossed, watching with expressions he couldn't quite read. Up on the platform stood a man named Teague, who sat on the town council and ran the only saloon. He was reading from a paper in his hand, but his voice was carrying badly, and Cole only caught pieces of it as he pushed through the crowd. Winter provisions included, county to reimburse at standard rate. Cole stopped when he saw her. She was standing to the left of Teague, a step back, the way you'd stand if someone had placed you there and told you not to move. She was maybe 26, 27. Dark hair pulled back in a knot that had come partly loose. Dress that had been mended in at least 3 places he could see from here. She was heavily pregnant, 8 months maybe, though Cole was no judge of such things. Her face was still. Not calm, exactly. Still. The way a person goes still when they've run out of road and they're just waiting to see which direction the fall takes them. Beside her, holding the hem of her dress with both hands, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. Brown hair, big dark eyes that swept the crowd like she was trying to find a friendly face and coming up empty. She didn't make a sound. She just held on to her mother's dress and watched. "Starting bid is $20, Teague announced. That covers the county's winter assessment and transfers legal care to the winning party." Somebody in the crowd laughed. Not a mean laugh. Worse than that. A bored one. Like this was mildly amusing. "10, a man called out. "Not a penny more for that kind of trouble." Teague shook his head. 20 is the floor. $20, gentlemen. What am I supposed to do with a woman who can barely walk and a kid that doesn't talk? Someone else said. I'll take the labor, but not the rest of it. It's a package arrangement, Teague said, with the patient tone of a man who'd had to explain things he also found inconvenient. Then you can keep it. More laughter. Cole felt something tighten in his chest. Not sentiment exactly. Something older and less polite than sentiment. The woman on the platform, Evelyn Hart, he'd remember the name later, hadn't looked at the crowd once. She was looking at a fixed point somewhere above their heads, like she'd decided the only way through this was to not be here, in any way she could manage it. The little girl tugged at her dress. Evelyn looked down, and for just a second her face changed. Her hand came down and covered the girl's hand where it gripped the hem, and she held it there. Cole watched that, and then he stopped thinking and opened his mouth. 22, he said. People turned. He was toward the back, and he wasn't loud about it, but the crowd shifted and Teague squinted in his direction. $22, Cole said again, louder this time. Do we have any other bids? Teague asked the crowd, with the tone of a man who felt this was probably going to be resolved now. Nobody said anything. Sold, Teague said. $22. Name? Cole Mercer. I'm out on the Holt Road about 6 miles north. Mr. Mercer, come up and sign the paperwork when you're ready. Cole worked his way through the crowd to the platform steps. People watched him the way they'd watch a man do something unexpectedly strange. Not hostile, just evaluating. He was aware of it, and it didn't much matter to him. He climbed the steps and stood in front of Evelyn Hart and the little girl. Up close, she was younger than he'd thought, and more tired. The skin under her eyes had a grayish quality that came from months of not sleeping properly. She looked at him with an expression he'd later spend a lot of time trying to describe to himself and never quite manage. It wasn't gratitude, not yet, and it wasn't relief. It was the look of someone who has been handed something they don't trust yet. Cole Mercer, he said. I heard. Her voice was quiet, steady. Evelyn Hart. He looked down at this girl. She stared back at him with those dark eyes and said nothing. This is Rose, Evelyn said. How do you do, Rose? Cole crouched down so he was at her level. She studied him with the careful attention of a child who'd learned that people who smiled at you weren't necessarily safe. Then she looked up at her mother and back at him and gave the smallest possible nod, which he decided to take as a good sign. He stood back up and signed Teague's paperwork. His handwriting was bad and always had been, but legal was legal. He handed it back and reached into his coat for his money, which was damn near everything he'd been carrying. $22. That was the fencing wire, the gloves, the 2 pounds of coffee he'd been planning to buy, and a new set of horseshoe nails. All of it gone. He didn't think about that particularly hard. My wagon's broken down on the North Road, he said to Evelyn. I'll need to get the wheels seen to before we can go anywhere. That might take a couple hours. I can find somewhere for you to sit. I'm all right standing, she said. Ma'am, you're 8 months along at least. You're not all right standing for 2 hours. She looked at him like she was deciding whether to argue, and then she didn't. There's a bench outside the dry goods store, she said. Rose and I know where it is. All right, I'll come find you when the wagon's ready. He climbed back down the platform steps. The crowd had mostly dispersed. Whatever entertainment value the thing had had was used up now. A few men watched Cole as he passed, with expressions that ranged from mild contempt to something closer to pity, though he couldn't have said who they were pitying. One man caught his arm, big fellow, mid-40s, with the kind of beard that meant he hadn't had a reason to shave in a while. Cole didn't know his name. You know who that woman belongs to, the man said, quietly, like he was doing Cole a favor. Cole looked at the hand on his arm and then at the man's face. She doesn't belong to anyone. The man dropped his hand. Gideon Hart, he said. You know the name? Cole didn't. You will, the man said, and walked away. Bum. The wheelwright was a taciturn Norwegian named Bjorn, who looked at the broken wheel and then at Cole and communicated, without words, that this was a preventable situation. He said he could have it done by mid-afternoon. Cole thanked him and went to find Evelyn and Rose. They were on the bench outside Hollis's dry goods store. Rose had found a stick somewhere and was drawing lines in the dirt at her feet, very serious about it. Evelyn sat with her back straight and her hands in her lap and watched the street the way a person watches a street when they've run out of ways to think about their situation. Cole sat down on the far end of the bench, leaving plenty of space between them, and took off his hat. The sun was still high. It was going to be a warm afternoon for October. "I want to say something," he said, "and I want you to hear it the way it's meant, not some other way." Evelyn looked at him. "I'm not buying a housekeeper," Cole said, "or anything else that might be in that county document. I've got a ranch that's too big for one person, and I've got 2 spare rooms that have been empty since my uncle moved to Denver. You and Rose can have both of them. You stay until you're back on your feet. If that's 6 weeks or 6 months, that's between you and your own circumstances, not me." He paused. "That's it. That's the whole speech." She was quiet for a moment. "What do you want in return?" "I just said, you just said what you're not asking for. That's not the same thing." He considered that. She was right, technically. "Help around the place when you're able," he said. "Nothing that's going to hurt you or the baby. And company, I suppose, if I'm being honest. I've been out there alone a long time, and I've started talking to my horses more than I'd like to admit." Something moved through her face then. Not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. The shape a smile makes before it decides whether to commit. "How many horses?" "2. Pete and a gray I haven't named." "Why haven't you named the gray?" "I kept thinking I'd sell him, and then I never did. Now he's been there 2 years, and it feels awkward to name him this late." "That's a terrible reason." "I know." Rose had stopped drawing in the dirt. She was watching Cole with the intensity of a small scientist observing an unfamiliar specimen. "She doesn't talk," Evelyn said quietly, not apologizing for it, just telling him. "Does she hear all right?" "Yes. She just stopped after her father died." Cole looked at Rose. Rose looked back at him with those enormous dark eyes, completely self-possessed. "That's all right," Cole said. "I don't talk that much either." The wagon was ready by mid-afternoon as Bjorn had promised. The new wheel was solid pine, darker than the rest, like a patch on an old coat. Cole loaded the fencing wire he'd finally gotten around to buying, the gloves and coffee he'd have to do without, and came to collect Evelyn and Rose from the bench. Rose climbed into the wagon bed without being asked and immediately found a piece of rope to examine. Evelyn climbed up to the seat with considerably more difficulty, and Cole had to extend a hand whether she wanted it or not, which she accepted without comment and without looking at him directly. They rolled out of Dry Creek in the late afternoon light. The town fell away behind them, and the road stretched north through grassland that had gone gold and brown with the season. The sky was enormous out here. That was the first thing Cole had noticed when he'd come west 8 years ago. The sky just kept going. He drove and didn't talk because he could feel how much silence she needed. Rose sat in the wagon bed and dangled her feet over the back edge and watched the road recede, apparently satisfied with this arrangement. After a while, Evelyn said, "You don't know what you've done." It wasn't an accusation. It was said like a statement of fact, almost gentle, like she was bracing him for something. "Then tell me," Cole said. She looked straight ahead. The wind was picking up, rolling down from the north with the particular cold edge that meant the season was turning for real. "My husband's brother," she said, "Gideon Hart. When James died, Gideon decided that the family was his responsibility. That's what he called it. Responsibility." "What did he mean by it?" "He meant he would decide where I lived and how I lived and whether I was allowed to leave." She said it flatly, without drama, like she'd had to say it several times now and had worn the emotion out of it through repetition. "He has money. He has connections with the county judge. He was already making arrangements to have me placed before the council stepped in with their arrangement, which was different but not better." Cole held the reins and thought about this. "He knows where you are now. He will. Dry Creek isn't a secret. Someone will tell him." She paused. "The man who stopped you before you left the square, that was probably one of Gideon's people." Cole looked at her. "You saw that." "I was watching the whole time," she said. "I wasn't going to close my eyes." He thought about the way she'd stood on that platform. That absolute stillness. He understood it better now. She'd been watching the crowd, cataloging it, the way an animal watches a field for movement. "All right," he said. "All right," she repeated, like she was checking to see if that was really all he had. It's not ideal news, but all right. She looked at him for a long moment, a measuring kind of look that he suspected she'd developed out of necessity. Then she turned back to the road. Behind them, Rose had lain down in the wagon bed and appeared to be asleep, using a folded piece of burlap as a pillow. She had the uncanny ability of small children to fall asleep anywhere without ceremony. "The baby," Cole said carefully. "When?" "6 weeks, maybe 7. "You'll need a doctor." "I'll need a lot of things," Evelyn said without self-pity. It was just the size of the problem, stated plainly. "We'll sort them out," Cole said. She didn't respond to that. He figured she'd believe it when she saw it. The ranch sat in a shallow valley between 2 ridges, with a creek that ran year-round along the eastern edge and a stand of cottonwoods that had gone completely yellow. Cole had built the main house himself, poorly at first, and then better as he learned, and it showed the marks of both phases. The porch had one post that leaned slightly to the left. The roof on the south addition was newer than the rest and a different color. The kitchen window had been replaced 3 times, twice by accident and once by a particularly aggressive storm, but it was solid. He knew every corner of it and every draft and exactly which floorboards groaned. He pulled up in front and tied the horses, and came around to help Evelyn down. Rose woke up instantly when the wagon stopped, that child awareness of movement, and scrambled out of the back with an agility that seemed impossible for someone who'd been deeply asleep 30 seconds ago. She stood in the yard and looked at the place. Then she looked at the barn, which was larger than the house. Then she looked at Cole. He watched her take it all in. "There are chickens in there," he said, nodding toward the barn, "and a very bad-tempered goat named Gerald that you should probably know about before you go in." Rose's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. Interest, he thought. Careful interest. "Come on inside," Cole said. "I'll get the stove going and you can look around." The house smelled like wood smoke and old coffee, and the particular dry smell of a place that hadn't had enough people in it. Evelyn stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the space. It wasn't tidy. Cole was functional about cleaning, not devoted to it. But it wasn't filth. Just the organized disorder of a single person who cooked and worked and slept in a practical loop. "The 2 rooms are at the back," he said, moving past her to the stove. "The larger one's on the right. You should have it. There's more floor space for when the baby comes." "That's your room," she said. She'd read the arrangement of the house in about 40 seconds. "I'll take the other one." "Cole." She stopped. It was the first time she'd said his name, and it sounded strange to both of them, slightly. "You don't have to. I've slept in a smaller room than that for 3 years because I never got around to thinking about it," he said. "It won't kill me to continue." She looked at him and pressed her lips together and didn't argue. Rose had already moved through the kitchen and down the hallway, and Cole could hear the particular careful footsteps of a child who was investigating something. He started laying the fire in the stove. "She's good at making herself at home," he said. "She adapts," Evelyn said. "She always has. It's just—" She stopped. "Just what?" "She used to talk all the time, constant. You couldn't get her to stop." She said it matter-of-factly, but something in her voice went thin for a second. She'd name everything she saw, trees, rocks, the different sounds the horses made. She had a whole system. "When did she stop?" "The day we buried James." Evelyn moved to the kitchen table and sat down carefully. "She said something at the grave. I don't even remember what. And then after that, nothing. The doctor said it would come back. That was 7 months ago." Cole fed kindling into the stove and didn't fill the silence. Sometimes a person needs to say something, and they don't need a response, just a listener. He'd learned that from his mother a long time ago. "Do you have food?" Evelyn asked after a moment. "Enough for tonight. I'll need to go back to town in a few days for proper supplies." He glanced at her. "Unless you'd rather I send someone else." She understood what he was asking, whether she was safe to be left alone. She thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'll tell you when I do." That was fair. He got the stove going and found what he had. Dried beans he'd had soaking since morning, some salt pork, half a jar of pickled beets that had been there longer than he cared to think about. He started the beans heating and sliced the pork and let the kitchen fill up with the smell of something being cooked. Rose appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at Cole, then at the pan. then at her mother. She had a smudge of something on her chin, probably from the barn, though she'd been in there all of 4 minutes, which was impressive. "Did you meet Gerald?" Cole asked. She gave him a look that said yes, she'd met Gerald, and Gerald had opinions. "He bit me the first week I had him," Cole said. "On the arm. Left a bruise the size of a dinner plate. He's improved since then, but not dramatically." Rose sat down at the kitchen table across from her mother. She looked at her mother's face in that way children do, that complete, unguarded attention. And then she reached across the table and touched her mother's hand with 2 fingers, briefly, and withdrew. Evelyn turned her hand over and gave her fingers a small squeeze before she let go. Cole kept his eyes on the stove. Dinner was plain but hot, which covered most of the requirements for a meal at the end of a hard day. They ate at the kitchen table with a lamp burning between them and the wind picking up outside, rattling the window in its old frame. Cole had been right about the draft in the corner. He'd have to stuff more rags into it before winter proper. Rose ate with the focused attention of a child who was genuinely hungry but too proud to make it obvious. She cleaned her bowl and then looked at the pot, and then at Cole, and he served her another portion without making a production of it. "There's enough," he said simply. "Eat." Evelyn watched this exchange and didn't say anything. After dinner, Cole washed up while Evelyn settled Rose in the back room. He could hear her through the wall. Not words, but the low, steady rhythm of a mother getting a child ready for sleep. It was a sound he hadn't heard in this house in a long time, and it sat strangely in the rooms, not badly, just differently from silence. He was sitting on the porch with his coat on when Evelyn came out, an hour or so later. She lowered herself carefully into the other chair. He'd pulled both out in case she wanted the air, and they sat looking at the dark yard. The creek was audible in the distance. A coyote called from somewhere on the eastern ridge and was answered by another, farther off. "She's asleep," Evelyn said. "Good." They were quiet for a while. The cold was real but not brutal yet, and the sky was completely clear, the kind of clear that only comes in the mountains in autumn when the air has had all the moisture wrung out of it. "I should tell you the rest of it," she said. "You don't have to tonight." "I should." She paused, gathering it in the way you gather something you've had to carry for a long time and you're about to set it down. Gideon believes that James left money and land that should belong to the Hart family, to him. He believes the baby, she paused on that, is leverage, that if he controls the child, he controls the inheritance. Is there an inheritance? "There's a deed," she said carefully, "and some other documents. James gave them to me before he died, told me to keep them safe." She looked at Cole. "I have kept them safe, but I don't entirely understand what they mean." "What kind of documents?" "County records, survey records, something from the land office. James worked with a lawyer in Billings before he got sick, and he had a correspondence that—" She stopped. "It's complicated." "It usually is," Cole said. "I don't know if they mean what I think they mean," she said, "but I think Gideon does know, and I think that's why he wants them back." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You have them with you, these papers?" "In the lining of my bag," she said. "I've had them there since I left the Hart place." He nodded slowly. "All right, we'll look at them when you're ready. There's a man in Billings I know. Not a lawyer, but he knows land law. Ranched out here 20 years. He'd be able to tell us what we're looking at." "Cole," her voice was careful, "I need you to understand something. Gideon he's not the kind of man who responds to paperwork and reasoning. He's the kind of man who responds to force. I've dealt with that kind before." "Not like this," she said quietly. "He has a reputation. People don't cross him without—" She stopped, started again. "2 men tried to stand up to him after James died, on my behalf. Both of them left Dry Creek before winter." Cole looked at her. "Left or were made to leave?" "I'm not sure there's a difference." The coyotes had gone quiet. The creek moved in the darkness and the wind pushed through the cottonwoods in the long, slow way it did when it was settling in for the night. "He'll come," she said. Not a question. "Probably," Cole agreed. "When he does, we'll deal with it then," he said. "You've got tonight, and you've got a warm room, and Rose is sleeping. Take that, and don't spend it on tomorrow." She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might push back on it. Instead, she looked out at the dark yard and the dark hills beyond it, and she breathed out slowly. "It's quiet here," she said. "Most nights." I forgot what that was like. He didn't say anything to that. He just let it be what it was. The sound of someone realizing they were, at least for this one night, safe. Even if safety was temporary, and they both knew it, and there was a man named Gideon Hart somewhere in the dark landscape of eastern Montana who would not let this stand. Even then. For this one night, quiet. The next morning, Cole was up before dawn, as was his habit. He got the stove going and put coffee on and went out to check the animals in the gray half-light. Gerald the goat regarded him with his usual expression of aggrieved sovereignty. Pete and the gray were dozing. The chickens woke up in their dramatic way, suddenly and all at once, like they'd all had the same thought. He was coming back across the yard when he saw Rose. She was standing at the fence of the small corral, looking at Pete. Pete looked back at her. She'd gotten up and dressed herself. Her boots were on the wrong feet, but she had them on, and found her way out here entirely on her own. It was just barely light enough to see by. Cole stopped at the edge of the yard and watched. Rose reached through the fence rail and extended her hand. Pete, who was almost terminally gentle with anyone small, dropped his big head and bumped her palm with his nose. Rose went completely still, that electric stillness of a child experiencing something wondrous. And then, very slowly, spread her fingers against his face. Pete exhaled, warm and visible in the cold air. Cole stayed where he was and didn't make a sound. Some things you don't interrupt. He went back inside and poured coffee and cut some bread from the loaf he'd made 2 days ago. Evelyn appeared in the kitchen doorway about 20 minutes later, moving carefully and looking like someone who hadn't slept as many hours as she needed, but more than she'd had in a while. "There's coffee," Cole said. "Rose is in the yard." Evelyn looked at the window. She could see the corral from there. Cole watched her face change when she spotted Rose at the fence. Not alarm, because Rose was fine, but something softer and more complicated. "She was up before me," Evelyn said with a note of surprise. "She's all right." Pete's gentle. Evelyn stood at the window for a moment with her coffee and watched her daughter and the horse. Her expression was the kind that doesn't have a name. Too many things in it for a single word to cover. "Thank you," she said. Cole sat down at the table and picked up his coffee. "Don't thank me yet." "I know, but still." She turned away from the window. "What do you need done today?" "Nothing that can't wait." "Cole." Her voice had the same flat insistence it had carried in the square the day before. "I'm pregnant, not incapacitated. Tell me what needs doing." He considered her. She was going to do whatever she was going to do regardless. He could see that. "The kitchen could use a proper clean," he said. "Not because it's filthy, just because I've been letting it go. And there's mending in the basket by the back door that I've been ignoring for a month." "That's all?" "Start there and see how you feel." She nodded, satisfied with the task. He noticed that about her, that having something concrete to do seemed to help, to give her a place to stand. He understood that. He was the same way. Outside, Rose was now apparently attempting to have a conversation with Pete through the fence rail in complete silence, apparently undisturbed by this limitation. Cole drank his coffee and thought about a man named Gideon Hart, who he had never met and who was already somewhere making plans. He thought about the papers in the lining of Evelyn's bag. He thought about the wheelwright's new pine wheel on his wagon, too bright against the older wood, and the broken spoke that had cracked on a Tuesday and landed him in that square in Dry Creek. The day was getting lighter. Gerald could be heard expressing displeasure from the barn. Pete's nose was probably still warm from where Rose's hand had been. Cole put down his coffee and went out to start the day's work, and the morning light came down across the valley, and nothing about it was simple, and all of it was real. 3 weeks passed, not smoothly. Nothing on a working ranch passes smoothly, but they passed, and that was something. Cole fixed 2 sections of fence along the north pasture, rotated the last of the summer hay into the barn, and spent an entire miserable afternoon on the roof patching a section that had been slowly losing its argument with gravity. The cold came down harder after the first week, proper October cold that bit through canvas and denim and reminded a person that the land didn't care about their plans. Evelyn cleaned the kitchen on her first full day and didn't stop there. She worked the way some people pray, steadily, without comment, finding a kind of footing in it. By the end of the first week, the house smelled different. Cole noticed it one morning when he came in from the barn and couldn't immediately identify what had changed. Then he realized it smelled like a place where people lived, plural. Coffee that had been made for more than one person. Bread that had been baked because there were mouths to feed. Small shifts, but the house registered them, the way an old building registers weather. She didn't ask permission for any of it. She just did things, rearranged the kitchen shelves so the heavier jars were at shoulder height, mended the curtains in the main room, found the rusted pan under the sink that Cole had given up on, and somehow got it serviceable again. When he asked how, she said, "Patience and salt," and went back to what she was doing. He found he didn't mind any of it. He'd expected to, a little. He'd been alone long enough that he had strong opinions about where things went and how the morning should feel. But her version of the house, it turned out, was better than his, and he was practical enough to admit it. Rose was a different study altogether. The child had established, within 48 hours, that she had opinions about the animals, and that the animals, specifically Pete, had opinions about her. She fed him carrots she found in the cold cellar without asking Cole first. He decided this was fine. She also decided, at some point during the second week, that Gerald the goat was not the adversary she'd been led to believe, and was found on a Tuesday afternoon sitting in the barn on an overturned bucket with Gerald's head in her lap, the two of them regarding each other with mutual respect. "She's something," Cole said to Evelyn, watching from the barn doorway. "She always has been," Evelyn said. "People just don't always see it." Rose still didn't speak, but she'd developed a whole vocabulary of looks. A steady, flat stare for things she disapproved of, a quick tilt of the head for questions. A rare thing that was almost a smile, but came and went so fast you weren't quite sure you'd seen it. Cole learned to read them. It took about a week, and then it was like learning a different language that turned out to be simpler than you expected. The papers came out at the end of the second week. Evelyn waited until Rose was asleep and the house had gone quiet, and then she came to the kitchen with an oilcloth envelope she'd had wrapped inside a spare dress at the bottom of her bag. She set it on the table between them, and Cole looked at it and then at her. "James put these together in the last month before he died," she said. "He knew he was going, I think. He didn't say it out loud, but he was that kind of man. Practical. He got his affairs as straight as he could, and he gave these to me and said, 'Don't let Gideon have them.'" Cole opened the envelope. There were 6 documents inside. Survey records in the careful hand of a county official. A letter from a land office in Billings dated the previous November. A deed, handwritten and signed, with 3 witness signatures at the bottom. And 2 pages of correspondence between James Hart and a man named R.T. Calloway, identified in the letter's heading as an attorney. Rasi. Cole read slowly. His education was functional, not polished. He'd gotten through the necessary books and no further, but he could parse legal language when he had to, even if it took time. The deed was the core of it. James Hart had owned 68 acres on the Connolly Road, the place Evelyn had called home, outright, clear of mortgage, with a water right attached to the eastern creek that ran through it. The survey records showed the boundary of that property, which included a narrow strip of land along the northern edge that also happened to sit directly across the only accessible route to the Larson Plateau. "What's on the Larson Plateau?" Cole asked. Evelyn looked at him carefully. "Gideon has been trying to run cattle up there for 3 years. Grazing rights. But the only road up goes through that northern strip." Cole looked at the deed again, looked at the survey map. "Which means whoever owns this 68 acres controls the only access." "That's what I think the letter from the lawyer means," Evelyn said. "I couldn't find another way to read it." Cole set the papers down. "That's not a small thing." "No. If Gideon gets control of the property, he gets the road," Evelyn said, "and the grazing. He's been buying up cattle all spring. He needs that plateau." She paused. "He told James, about a year before he died, that the northern strip should belong to the Hart family in common. James said no, said it was deeded to him specifically, and he intended it to stay that way." She folded her hands on the table. They didn't speak much after that. Cole looked at the Calloway correspondence again. The attorney had written in March, advising James to register the deed with the county in Billings rather than the local office, and to ensure that the inheritance clause named Evelyn specifically, not the Hart estate in general. The second letter, from James to Calloway, confirmed he'd done both. The registration stamp was in the corner of the deed, Billings, dated April. James had died in May. Gideon had moved on Evelyn in June. Cole sat back in his chair. The lamp put a warm circle on the table and left the rest of the kitchen in shadow, and he sat in that shadow and thought about a man he'd never met, and what kind of man does that? Watches his brother's widow and decides the right response is to reach for what she's carrying. He didn't go to the county office, Cole said. What? The registration's in Billings. If Gideon tried to challenge the deed through the local office, he'd come up empty. He might not know it's in Billings. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Or he knows, and he's planning to challenge it regardless. He has connections with Judge Reeves. Reeves. Cole knew the name. Not the man, but the reputation. Reeves has been on that bench 9 years. People say he's accommodating, Evelyn said flatly. To men with money. Yeah. Cole looked at the papers again. We need Calloway. He's in Billings. I know. That's 3 days' ride. I know that too. He looked at her. I'm not saying go tomorrow. I'm saying that when this comes to a head, Calloway is the thread we'll need to pull. He knows the filing, he knows James's intentions, and he can produce correspondence that a county judge can't easily ignore. He paused. Even a judge who's accommodating. Evelyn reached across the table and drew the papers back. She folded them with the same careful hands that had folded them before and put them back in the oilcloth envelope and held it. I've been carrying these since May, she said. Not complaint, just the fact of it. You won't have to much longer. She looked at him. You keep saying things like that, like you're certain. I'm not certain, he said, but I'm not done either, and there's a difference. She held his eyes for a moment and then looked down at the envelope in her hands. Whatever she decided, she kept it to herself. She tucked the envelope inside her dress, against her ribs, the same place she'd been carrying it. I need to sleep, she said. Go ahead. She got up from the table, and he heard her move down the hall to the room at the back. He sat at the kitchen table for a while longer, with the lamp burning low, and listened to the wind work at the house. The week after that was when Holt Deaver showed up. Cole knew Deaver, not well, but enough. He was a ranch hand who'd worked various places in the county over the years, the kind of man who moved from job to job without quite explaining why he'd left the last one. He rode up the lane on a Wednesday morning while Cole was splitting wood, and he had the easy, practiced manner of someone who'd made a business of appearing harmless. Heard you had some boarders, Deaver said, from horseback. Cole set the axe down but didn't step away from it. That's so. Town's talking about it. You know how people are. Deaver had a way of smiling that didn't involve his eyes. Thought I'd ride out, see if you needed any help around the place. Extra hands, with winter coming. I'm all right. The widow Hart, Deaver said, still with that smile. She's settling in? Cole looked at him for a long moment. You ride out from Dry Creek this morning? Left about sunup, yeah. That's 8 miles. I enjoy the ride. 8 miles is a long way to check on somebody's boarders, Cole said. You want to tell me who sent you, or you want to sit on that horse a while longer and think about it? The smile went thin. Deaver looked at the axe and at Cole's hands and made a brief calculation. Nobody sent me. Then I've got nothing for you, Cole said. Have a safe ride back. Deaver held his ground for a few seconds longer than was comfortable, just long enough to make a point about the kind of man he was. And then he turned his horse and went back down the lane without another word. Cole picked up the axe and went back to the wood, but he watched the lane until Deaver was out of sight. That evening, he told Evelyn. She listened without expression. When he was done, she said, Deaver worked for Gideon last winter. I saw him at the Hart place twice. You recognize the name. I recognize the description. She paused. He's not a violent man, I don't think. He carries messages, finds things out. So now Gideon knows exactly where you are. He probably already knew. This was just confirming. She looked at the kitchen window, which showed nothing but dark. He'll want to come himself. He always wants to handle things personally. He thinks it demonstrates, she searched for the word, authority. How long do you think? A week, maybe less. She looked back at Cole. He won't come alone. No, Cole agreed. Men like that never do. He went out that night and checked the rifle he kept on pegs above the door and the older one he kept in the barn, and made sure both were clean and loaded. He wasn't a man who reached for guns easily, but he also wasn't a fool about what was coming, and there's a difference between anticipating violence and wanting it. Gideon Hart arrived on a Friday. Cole was in the south field mending a fence section with a roll of wire and a pair of pliers when he heard horses. More than one. He straightened up and watched 3 riders come down the lane in the cold morning air. He left the wire where it was and walked back toward the house with his hands empty and visible. Gideon Hart was easy to identify, even at a distance. He rode like a man who owns whatever road he's on. He was somewhere north of 50, heavy-set in the way of men who'd done physical work once and had stopped and carried the frame of it with them. A dark coat, good quality. A hat that had been expensive once. His face had the set of someone who had not been told no enough times to get used to the feeling. The other 2 riders stayed back when Gideon pulled up in front of the house. Cole came across the yard and stopped about 15 feet from him. Neither man said anything for a moment. "Mr. Mercer," Gideon said. His voice was the kind of voice that expected rooms to quiet when it spoke. "I appreciate you providing temporary shelter for my brother's wife. In difficult circumstances." "She's not your brother's wife anymore," Cole said. "Your brother's dead." Gideon's expression didn't flicker. "Which makes her welfare a family concern. I'm sure you understand. I understand she's here because she chose to be, and she's welcome to stay as long as she likes." "That's kind of you." Gideon's tone suggested kindness was something he found slightly ridiculous. "But the arrangement the county made, I've reviewed the paperwork, and it's my opinion that it wasn't properly executed. Evelyn belongs with family. With respect," Cole said, "she's not a piece of property that can belong to anyone." Something moved in Gideon's face then. A brief, involuntary tightening. He controlled it quickly. "I'm not here to argue jurisdiction with a fence rancher," he said. "I'm here to collect my sister-in-law and her daughter and return them to a safe situation. I'm sure you didn't take on this obligation expecting it to be permanent." "I didn't take it on expecting anything. I took it on." They looked at each other. The 2 riders behind Gideon held their horses steady and said nothing. They were the kind of men whose entire purpose was to be standing there. The front door of the house opened. Evelyn came out onto the porch. She moved carefully, one hand on the railing. She was nearly 9 months now, and moving carefully was simply what was required. But she stood straight when she got there. She looked at Gideon the way Cole had seen her look at things she'd already decided about. Gideon looked at her for a moment, and his expression did something complicated and unreadable, something between anger and grief, and something else that Cole couldn't name. Whatever it was, he put it away fast. "Evelyn," he said. "Gideon," she said, "this isn't necessary. Whatever you think—" "I'm not coming back," she said. Clear. No shake in it. "You're in no condition to, I'm in exactly the condition I'm in," she said, "and I'm staying here. The county document is legal. Mr. Mercer is legally responsible for my welfare and Rose's welfare through the arrangement. You've seen the paperwork. You know how it reads." Gideon's jaw tightened. "The county arrangement doesn't supersede family rights." "Then take it up with the county," Cole said. Gideon looked back at him. There was something in his eyes that Cole registered the way you register heat from a fire. Not a threat made exactly, but the potential for one, present and real. "This isn't finished," Gideon said. "It isn't," Cole agreed. "But today it's finished." It took several seconds. Gideon sat on his horse and looked at the house and at Cole and at Evelyn on the porch, and made the calculation that men like him make when they find themselves without the leverage they came in expecting. Then he turned his horse, and the 2 riders turned with him, and they went back down the lane. Cole stood in the yard and watched until they were gone. Then he turned around. Rose was standing in the doorway behind Evelyn, looking around her mother at the retreating horses. She watched them go, and then she looked at Cole, and the expression on her face was one he'd never seen from her before. Not the careful watchfulness, not the flat stare. Something older, something that on a grown person's face you'd call recognition. Like she'd seen this kind of thing before and she was cataloging it. He crossed the yard and came up the porch steps, and Evelyn let out a long, slow breath. "He'll be back," she said. "Yep." "With something more than 2 riders." "Probably." She looked at him. "And you're still not—" "Still not done," he said. She pressed her lips together and went back inside, and he didn't follow immediately. He stood on the porch and looked at the lane, empty now, and thought about what Gideon had said. This isn't finished. And about the particular way he'd looked at Evelyn when she came out on the porch, that complicated, unreadable thing that had been on his face for just a moment. Cole had seen that look before, on a different man, years ago. It was the look of someone who had confused possession with love for so long that they no longer knew the difference. That was, in some ways, the most dangerous kind of man. The fire happened on a Saturday night, 11 days later. Cole woke to the smell before he heard anything. Smoke, but hot and wrong, not the usual wood smoke comfort of the stove. He was out of bed and down the hall before he was fully awake. He went to Rose's room first, instinct, and she was sitting up in bed in the dark with her eyes wide open, which meant she'd woken before him. He picked her up and went for Evelyn's room. Evelyn was already on her feet. "I smell it," she said. "The barn," he said. "Get out front and stay in the yard, both of you." He went out the back of the house and across the yard at a run and hit the barn door, and the heat of it pushed him back. Not fully involved, not yet. The fire had started in the south corner, near the old hay, and the horses were screaming. He went in anyway. The smoke was low and thick, and he couldn't see well. He found Pete's stall by memory and got the halter off the post and got it on him half blind. And Pete was wild with it, whites of his eyes showing, and Cole talked to him low and firm the way you have to, and got him moving. The gray was harder, more flight in him, less trust, and Cole burned his forearm on a falling ember getting the stall door open. And the gray didn't wait for a halter, just came out hard and fast, and Cole had to flatten against the wall. The chickens were a loss. Gerald the goat had already found his own exit, which, given Gerald's character, was not a surprise. Cole got out with Pete, lead rope in hand, and the gray was already 20 yards across the dark yard, not going anywhere, just putting distance between himself and the fire. Evelyn was in the yard with Rose, and they were both watching the barn with the particular stillness of people who know that panic won't help, but can't quite get their bodies to understand that. "Are you burned?" Evelyn asked. "Arm. It's not bad." He passed Pete's lead to her. "Hold him." He went to the water trough and soaked a piece of burlap, and went back to the barn and did what he could, which was not nothing, but was not enough. The south corner was going. The structure wasn't. The walls were green timber, and it was a cold night, and the fire hadn't gotten the purchase it would have needed to take the whole building. By the time the sun was starting to gray the eastern horizon, he had it controlled and then out. The south corner was a char. The hay was gone. Cole sat down in the dirt of the barn floor and breathed for a while. Rose appeared in the barn doorway. She looked at him, and then at the burned corner, and then at him again. "I'm all right," he said. She came in and sat down next to him in the dirt, without being asked and without appearing to have any concern about her dress. She leaned her shoulder against his arm, carefully, because it was the burned one, and then adjusted and leaned against his other side. Cole looked down at her. She was looking straight ahead at the burned corner with the same solemn attention she gave everything. He didn't know what to do with that exactly, so he just let it be. Evelyn came in a few minutes later and looked at both of them sitting in the dirt and didn't say anything immediately. She lowered herself down carefully and sat on Cole's other side, and the three of them sat in the smoky cold of the ruined barn corner and breathed. "He did this," Evelyn said. "Not a question." "No way to prove it," Cole said. "No way to prove it was an accident either." "You think it was an accident?" "No." "Neither do I." She looked at the char. "He wants to make it too expensive to keep us here. The hay, the supplies, the repairs. He'll keep pushing until you decide it's not worth it." "He doesn't know me very well then." She turned to look at him. In the early morning light, with smoke in her hair and exhaustion in her face, she looked absolutely nothing like the way people look in stories when they're being brave. She looked tired and scared and determined, which is what actual bravery looks like. "I mean it," Cole said. "I'm not moving anyone anywhere." She held his eyes and he let her, because she needed to see that he wasn't saying it easily or carelessly, that he'd weighed it and he still meant it. "Okay," she said. He got up and went to look at his burned forearm in the better light near the barn door. The skin was red and blistered in a stripe about 4 inches long, which was unpleasant but manageable. Evelyn came up beside him and looked at it. "I need to wrap that," she said. "It'll wait." It won't, actually. He looked at her sideways. You're 9 months pregnant. My hands work fine, she said, with a precision that didn't leave room for argument. She wrapped it in this kitchen with linen torn from an old shirt, with the efficiency of someone who'd tended injuries before and didn't require gratitude for it. Her hands were sure and not gentle exactly, but not rough either. Careful in the way of someone who understands that careful is different from soft. Rose watched from the kitchen doorway. Thank you, Cole said when she was done. Don't thank me. You ran into a burning barn. The horses were in there. I know why you did it, she said. She wasn't angry, exactly, but something in her voice had the quality of someone who had watched people take stupid risks for reasons she understood and couldn't quite argue with. She stopped. Just what? She picked up the leftover linen. Don't die, she said flatly. We'd be in a very poor situation. Rose made a sound. Both Cole and Evelyn looked at her. It was barely anything, a short exhaled sound, the shape of a laugh without the voice behind it. But it was something. Rose looked at both of them, looking at her, and her expression said, very clearly, that she had no idea what they were making a fuss about. Cole looked at Evelyn, and Evelyn looked at Cole, and neither of them said anything, because it felt like the kind of moment that words would damage. He went back out to deal with the barn. The next week was the hardest run of it. He had to rebuild the south corner with lumber he didn't have the budget for. He borrowed against next year's cattle money to cover it, which was a calculation he didn't enjoy making. He sent word to a man he knew in the next county about the hay situation, and the man came through with enough to get the horses through winter, which cost him more than the lumber. He didn't tell Evelyn the extent of it, not because he was protecting her, she was sharper than that and would see through it, but because the numbers were his problem to manage and she had enough to carry. She saw through it anyway. You're short, she said one evening. I'm managing. Cole. She sat at the kitchen table across from him with her hands folded over her abdomen and the look of someone who had decided to stop being diplomatic. I'm not a fool and I'm not fragile. Tell me how short. He told her. She listened without expression. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. The deed, she said. The 68 acres. If we register my ownership with the county in Billings, proper registration, it has a valuation. I could put it up as collateral against a loan. Your property shouldn't have to pay for my barn. It's not paying for your barn, she said. It's paying for our situation, which Gideon created. She looked at him steadily. Let me do something, Cole. I've been sitting here letting you... She stopped. Started again. I'm not built for sitting. Let me do something. He looked at the table. He thought about the oilcloth envelope and the Billings registration, and a lawyer named Calloway who knew how all of it fit together. We'd need to go to Billings, he said. I know. You're 9 months along. I have at least 2 weeks, she said, and the road through to Billings is better than it was. You know that. He didn't immediately say no, which she took as correctly as he'd meant it. Let me think on it, he said. She nodded. She'd gotten what she wanted, which was the door left open. 2 nights later, she woke him at 3 a.m. He was at her door before he'd finished waking. Not the baby, she said quickly. It's not time yet. She was standing in the hallway in her nightdress with a lamp, and she looked at him with the expression she'd had on the porch when Gideon came, controlled, decided, seeing clearly. I heard riders, she said, about 20 minutes ago, past the north pasture. He stood in the hallway and listened, nothing now but wind and the creek. How many? At least 2, maybe 3. He went and got the rifle off the pegs and checked it. Cole, she said. He looked at her. He's escalating, she said. Whatever he's planning, it's getting closer. We're running out of time to be passive about this. He held the rifle and looked at her in the lamplight. This woman who had been sold at auction 3 weeks ago and had in that time cleaned his kitchen and read land deeds and sat in a burned barn in the dirt, and just now woken him out of a sound sleep with clear eyes and a working mind. And he thought about what she'd said. Passive. They weren't going to be able to wait this out. He'd known that for a while now. He'd been managing the days, fixing what broke, putting himself between her and the next problem as it came. But managing days is not the same as having a plan. Gideon was building towards something. Legal pressure, physical pressure, or both. And a man who burned your barn because he was angry was not going to stop at the barn. Tomorrow, Cole said, we'll talk about what we do next. She nodded. She looked at the rifle and then at his wrapped forearm and then at his face, and she went back to her room. Cole sat up the rest of the night in the chair by the kitchen window with the rifle across his knees and the dark yard visible and empty, and he sat there until the sky started turning and the cold came through the glass and Gerald began complaining from the direction of the barn, which meant the day was starting whether anyone was ready for it or not. He was tired. His arm hurt. The south corner of his barn was still black and raw, and he owed money against next year before next year had even started, and he wasn't done. He put the rifle back on the pegs when it got light enough that he could see the lane clearly, and he went and started the stove. And when Rose appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later, boots on the right feet this time, he poured her a cup of the weak tea she'd decided she preferred and put it on the table, and she sat down and wrapped both hands around it like it was something precious. They sat in the kitchen in the early morning quiet and waited for the day to come. The talk happened the next morning after Rose had gone out to the corral. Cole poured 2 cups of coffee and set them on the table and sat down, and Evelyn sat across from him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Outside, the gray horse was standing at the fence rail, and Rose was there with him, her breath making small clouds in the cold. The yard was empty of anything threatening. The lane was clear. But the feeling of the night before, the riders she'd heard, the waiting, sat in the kitchen with them like a third person who hadn't introduced themselves. He's going to try something legal, Cole said. That's next. He came out here with 2 men and got nothing. He burned the barn and got nothing. The next move is paperwork. Evelyn wrapped both hands around her cup. Judge Reeves. If he's got Reeves, he can file a petition for guardianship. You're unmarried, you're near term, you have no property in this county. On paper, you look like exactly what he'll say you are, a woman who needs to be managed. Cole said it plainly because there was no kind way to say it. He could make an argument that the county arrangement was improper, that I'm not a suitable, that the situation isn't stable. She listened without reacting. He'd noticed she did that, gave you the full amount of what you were saying before she responded, didn't patch over the hard parts with reassurance. So we need to move before he files, she said. We need to remove the argument before he can make it. Cole looked at the table. He'd been awake most of the night with this, and he'd come to the same point from every direction. There's one thing that makes his petition impossible. One thing that a county judge, even Reeves, can't get around. She looked at him. She'd already gotten there. He could see it in her face. You're going to say marry you, she said. I'm going to ask it, Cole said. There's a difference. She was quiet. Outside, Rose had climbed up to sit on the fence rail, and the gray had moved his head to rest it near her knee, which meant the gray had finally decided she was trustworthy, which was more than he'd done for Cole in 2 years. I know what this is, Cole said. I'm not... He stopped and started again with more care. I'm not asking you to feel something you don't feel, or pretend to something. I'm asking you to let me make a legal fact that protects you and Rose and the baby. After that, the shape of it is whatever you want it to be. What does that mean, the shape of it? It means I'm not asking for a wife in any way that you're not willing to give. You'd have your room. You'd have autonomy over your own life. If 6 months from now you want to take the deed and the children and go somewhere else, I won't stop you. He paused. But right now, today, legally, I think it's the only move we have left. She looked at him for a long time. Not with distrust. She'd moved past that. It was more that she was looking at him the way you look at a map when you're trying to figure out which roads are real and which ones are old and no longer passable. Assessing. Being honest with herself about what she was assessing. You've thought about what this costs you, she said. Yes. And I decided I didn't mind. Cole. Her voice was careful. You're a young man. You'd be... I'm 34, he said. That's not young. You'd be taking on a wife you didn't choose, 2 children, a legal dispute with a man who burns buildings, and a debt that was caused by a situation that needed handling, he said. And I handled it. That's the end of that accounting. She looked at him. You're stubborn. I've been told. It's not a compliment. I know. He met her eyes. What's your answer? She breathed in slowly and let it out. She looked down at the table, at her coffee, at her hands around the cup. She looked at the window where Rose was visible at the fence. Then she looked back at him. "If I say yes," she said, "I want you to understand something clearly. I'm not a burden that's been handed to you. I'm a person who's in a bad situation, and I'm choosing a practical option because I can see it clearly, and I'm not too proud to take it." She paused. "I'm choosing it, not collapsing into it." "I understand that," Cole said, "and I want it said plainly between us, like, this is a legal arrangement first. Whatever else it is or isn't, that's between us to work out over time. But I won't have you being kind to me out of obligation and me being grateful out of debt. That's not a life for either of us." "Agreed." She looked at him once more, the full, clear look. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." He nodded. Then he picked up his coffee and drank it, because he needed to do something with his hands. She did the same. After a moment, she said, "When?" "Soon as we can manage it. There's a justice of the peace in Heron, 12 miles west. Man named Aldous Webb. He's done it before and he doesn't ask for much." "This week?" "Tomorrow, if you're willing, or the day after." He looked at her. "You're running out of weeks and I'd rather the paperwork exist before you go into labor." She almost laughed. Not quite. It was that precursor thing again, the shape without the sound. But almost. That's possibly the least romantic reason to set a date that anyone has ever given. "I told you I wasn't romantic." "You didn't, actually." "Well, now you know." They went the next day. Cole borrowed a wagon from his neighbor Aldous Pitts, who lived 3 miles north and asked no questions, which Cole appreciated. Evelyn had one good dress, dark wool, navy, that she'd kept folded at the bottom of her bag through everything. She put it on in the morning and came out of her room, and Cole thought, and did not say, that she looked like someone who had made peace with a hard decision and was walking into it straight. Rose wore her cleanest dress and had managed her boots correctly. She carried the small cloth rabbit she'd had since Dry Creek, holding it by one ear with complete unconscious dignity. The road to Heron was rough in places, and Evelyn held the side of the seat without complaint on the bad stretches. It was a cold, clear day, the kind Montana produces in November, like a proof of concept for winter. "Here," it says, "is what I'm capable of." The mountains to the west were white to their midsections. Cole drove, and they didn't talk much, which was its own kind of ease. He'd noticed that about the two of them. The silences between them had stopped being uncomfortable weeks ago. They'd become something functional, like the silences in a working kitchen when two people are both doing things, and don't need words for it. Aldous Webb was a small, precise man in his 60s who operated out of a building that also served as a land registry office and apparently a cobbler's shop, based on the smell. He produced the necessary book and asked the necessary questions without ceremony or editorializing, which Cole considered the ideal approach. "Do you have witnesses?" Webb asked. Cole had thought of this. He'd sent word to Aldous Pitts before they left, and Pitts had ridden over to Heron that morning and was sitting in the back of Webb's office reading a newspaper. He looked up when asked and said, "Sure," with the easy manner of a man who understood that some things were between people and your job as a witness was simply to be present. Webb's housekeeper, a broad woman named Mrs. Fentner, served as the second. The ceremony took 11 minutes. Cole said what was asked of him in a flat, clear voice. Evelyn said what was asked of her the same way. Webb pronounced them married in a tone that suggested he'd done this enough times to know that the words mattered even when the ceremony was brief, and he didn't shortchange them. Rose stood beside her mother throughout and held her rabbit and watched Webb with the solemn attention she gave to things she'd decided were important. Afterward, outside in the cold, Pitts shook Cole's hand and said, "Congratulations," without irony, and rode home. Mrs. Fentner had gone back inside. Webb was already writing in his book. Cole and Evelyn stood beside the wagon for a moment. The wind was moving down the street in Heron, pushing dry leaves against the building fronts. A dog somewhere was barking at something that had probably already left. "Well," Evelyn said. "Well," Cole said. They looked at each other. It was strange and it was real, and both of those things were true at the same time. Rose tugged on her mother's hand and pointed at the building across the street, which appeared to sell baked goods. She looked at Evelyn with the expression that meant a question. Evelyn looked at Cole. "Do we have 2 bits?" he said. "Maybe 3. They crossed the street and Rose chose a molasses cookie, with the careful deliberation of someone making a significant decision, and Evelyn got one too without being asked, and Cole paid for them with the coins in his vest pocket, and they stood on the wooden walkway outside and ate them in the cold, and it was, he thought, not pretty, and not what anyone would have written if they'd been trying to write it as a story, but it was real, and the cookie was good, and for a few minutes nobody was after them. They drove home in the afternoon light. That evening, Cole put the marriage certificate in with Evelyn's oilcloth envelope and put them both in the lockbox he kept under the floorboard in his room, along with the rifle ammunition and the $30 he kept for emergencies. He pressed the board back down and weighted it with the corner of the bed frame. Gideon Hart arrived 6 days later. He came with more men this time, 5 of them, plus himself, riding up the lane in the thin December light like something you'd see if you'd been expecting trouble and had not yet had the pleasure of being wrong. Cole was on the porch when they came, sitting in the cold with his coffee because he'd been doing that every morning since the night Evelyn heard riders, watching the lane, waiting. He stood up when he saw them. He went inside and told Evelyn, who was in the kitchen. She put down what she was doing and straightened up and looked at him with those clear eyes. She was close enough to her time now that she moved slowly and carefully and had stopped arguing about resting. The baby could be any day. "Stay inside," he said. "Unless you want to come out." "I'll come out," she said. "You don't have to." "I know." She picked up her shawl from the chair back. "But I want him to see that I'm here, and I'm standing, and I made a choice." They went out together. Gideon pulled up in front of the porch and looked at both of them. He had something different in his expression this time. An arrangement about his mouth that was almost satisfaction, which meant he had something and he thought it was enough. "Mr. Mercer," he said. "Evelyn." He looked at her with that complicated thing again and then put it somewhere behind his face. "I've come to inform you that I've filed a petition with the county court. Judge Reeves has agreed to review the arrangements." "Which arrangements?" Cole said. "The county document. Gideon stopped. Something had registered. He looked at Cole and then at Evelyn with sharpened attention. "The county document transferring." "The county document transferred welfare responsibility to me," Cole said. "That document was dissolved 3 days ago when Evelyn and I were married. You're welcome to review the certificate at the Heron Land Registry Office. It's properly recorded." The satisfaction left Gideon's face. It didn't leave slowly. It went all at once, like a lamp going out, and what replaced it was something rawer and less controlled. He looked at Evelyn. "You didn't." "I did," she said. "Evelyn," his voice had dropped. There was something in it that might have been genuine underneath everything else, something that had more history to it than Cole could see. "You don't know what you've done." "I know exactly what I've done," she said. "I married a man who treats me like a person. I'd recommend it." One of the men behind Gideon shifted in his saddle. Another was watching Cole with the professional attention of someone trying to calculate distances and angles. Cole kept his eyes on Gideon. "Your petition to Judge Reeves," Cole said, "addresses a woman named Evelyn Hart, widow of James Hart, under the care of the county. That woman no longer legally exists. There is now an Evelyn Mercer, wife of Cole Mercer, resident on this property, whose welfare is her own business and mine. Reeves can't touch it." He paused. "You can confirm all of this with a lawyer before you waste any more of your time." Gideon's jaw was tight. His hands on the reins were tight. The men behind him were watching the situation with the careful neutrality of men who'd been paid to be here but not to die here, and could feel the distinction. "You think this is finished?" Gideon said. His voice had gotten quiet, which was, Cole had already learned, worse than when it was loud. "I think you came here with a plan that doesn't work anymore," Cole said. "What you do with that is your business. My brother's property is deeded to Evelyn," Cole said. "Your brother made sure of it. In Billings, with a lawyer, before he died. I'd suggest you talk to someone in that office before you make any more filings, because anything that goes to court is going to have a paper trail attached to it that's going to be uncomfortable for your interests." That landed. Cole watched it land. The slight change in Gideon's posture, the way his eyes went briefly somewhere else before returning. He hadn't known about the Billings registration, or he'd suspected and hadn't confirmed it. Either way, Cole had just told him something he didn't want to know. "This isn't finished," Gideon said for the second time, but it was the same words doing different work. Not a warning now, more a thing a man says because he can't think of anything that fits better. You can go, Cole said. The man behind Gideon, who'd been calculating distances, moved his horse a step forward. Cole looked at him directly, not at Gideon, and the look was the kind that doesn't need words. The man stopped. Gideon turned his horse. They watched him go, all 5 men, in a loose group, back down the lane, and Cole stood on his porch with his hand near, but not on the rifle he'd leaned against the house wall that morning, and didn't move until they were gone. Then he sat down on the porch steps. Evelyn sat beside him, lowering herself carefully. You told him about Billings, she said. Yes. He was going to find out anyway when any lawyer worth 2 cents told him to check the registration. I'd rather he found out from me and had to think about what else I know. Cole looked at the empty lane. Men like that move faster when they think they have surprise on their side. I wanted him to know the ground isn't what he thought. She considered this. He's going to come back angrier. Yes. And you're still here, he said. Still not done. She looked at her hands in her lap for a moment, then she said, very quietly, so that it wasn't a thing broadcast to the empty yard, "Thank you." He didn't say you're welcome because it would have made too much of it, and making too much of things wasn't either of their ways. He just nodded, and they sat there on the porch steps in the December cold while the lane stayed empty. They stayed outside for a little while longer than was probably wise for someone 9 months pregnant and a man with a healing burn on his arm, but neither of them moved first. So they stayed. It was Rose who broke the moment. She appeared in the doorway behind them and stood there for a second, and then she stepped around Cole and sat on the step below both of them, arranging herself with the precise efficiency she brought to everything. And she had her rabbit in her lap, and she was looking out at the empty lane the same way they were. Cole looked down at the top of her head. She didn't look up. They sat there, the 3 of them, in the cold. The next 3 days were quiet in the way that's different from peace. Quiet. The way a held breath is quiet, the way the air gets before a storm that you can feel in your back teeth before you can see it in the sky. Cole checked the lane every morning and the north pasture every evening and kept the rifle where he could get to it quickly. And Evelyn moved through the house with the careful economy of someone who has calculated exactly how much energy she has and is not prepared to waste any of it. On the 4th night, the temperature dropped hard. Cole woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of sleet against the window glass, and went to put more wood on in the kitchen, and found Evelyn already in the kitchen doorway, one hand on the frame. He looked at her. It's starting, she said. He looked at the window, at the ice driving sideways against the glass. Of course it was. How far along? Maybe an hour, maybe less. She was managing it, he could see, keeping her breathing even, staying ahead of it. There's a woman in Heron, Mrs. Calloway. She's midwifed before. I don't know if 12 miles in sleet at 2 in the morning, Cole said. He was already thinking. She can't come out here in this, and I can't get you there. He looked at her. Have you done this before? Once, she said. With Rose, it was... She stopped. James was there. Cole stood in the kitchen in his work clothes and thought about the sleet and the road and 12 miles and what was available to him right now, in this house, tonight. I've got clean linen, he said. I've got hot water as fast as I can get it. I know the basic shape of it from... He stopped. I helped birth a foal 3 years ago that was turned wrong. That's not the same thing. No, she said, with a breath that was slightly too controlled to be just a breath. It's not. Tell me what you need, he said. Right now, start there. What do you need? She looked at him. There was something working behind her eyes. Not fear exactly, but the close cousin of it. She breathed, and it settled. Get Rose up, she said. Put her in the main room with a lamp and tell her to stay there. Then boil water and bring the extra blankets from the chest. She paused. And stay calm. If you panic, I'll panic. I don't panic, he said. Good, she said. Neither do I. He got Rose up, which was easy. She woke at the sound of his voice and seemed to assess the situation immediately, with the unnerving accuracy she had for reading rooms. He settled her in the main room with a lamp and a blanket, and she sat on the floor with her rabbit and watched him go without making a sound, her dark eyes tracking him. He boiled water. He pulled the extra blankets from the chest and brought them to Evelyn's room. He banked the fire in the stove high enough to keep the house warm through what was going to be at least several hours. And he did all of this without rushing, and without fumbling because he had been given a job and he intended to do it. What followed was the longest night Cole Mercer could remember. He stayed close, went where he was needed, and mostly he was needed to be steady. Not to do much, not to say much, just to be present in a way that didn't add to the weight of the room. Evelyn worked through it the way she worked through everything. Without melodrama, without asking for more than she needed, though there were moments that were hard and she didn't pretend they weren't. She made sounds that were not dignified and did not care, and he respected that. He held what needed to be held and moved when he was told to move and kept his mouth shut unless she asked him something direct. Somewhere in the deep hours before morning, with sleet still going at the windows and the kitchen fire burning hot, a baby came into the world in a back room of a working ranch on the Montana frontier, making the particular announcement that babies make, which is, in any language and any circumstance, loud. Cole held her. That was something he hadn't expected, that she'd be handed to him first while Evelyn was still catching her breath. He held her in both hands with the blanket wrapped around her, this furious small thing that weighed almost nothing and was pinker than he'd expected and objecting loudly to every aspect of the situation. He stood with her by the lamp and she looked at him, or looked at the light, or looked at the world, with the blurry, fierce concentration of someone who had just arrived somewhere and was making up their mind about it. He'd held a lot of things in his life. A good tool has a particular weight and balance to it that you get to know over years. He'd held a rifle that had been his uncle's, and a deed to his own land, and once, years ago, a letter that had bad news in it that he'd stood with for a long time before he could put it down. This was different from all of those things. He wasn't prepared for how different it was. He brought her to Evelyn, who took her with shaking arms and held her against her chest and closed her eyes, and Cole stood back and gave them that. After a moment, Rose appeared in the doorway. Cole hadn't heard her come down the hall. She stood at the doorway and looked at her mother and the bundle in her arms, and her face did something that Cole would not have been able to describe if someone asked him to. It was the face of someone encountering something they had no category for yet, something that was going to rearrange things. Evelyn looked up and saw her. "Come here," she said. Rose crossed the room and stood at the edge of the bed and looked at the baby. The baby had calmed somewhat, though was still making small sounds of general dissatisfaction. Rose looked at her for a long time. Then she reached out one careful finger and touched the baby's hand, and the baby's hand, that involuntary grip of newborns, closed around it. Rose went absolutely still. "She's going to need a name," Evelyn said softly. Cole stood at the back of the room and said nothing. This was not his moment to speak. Rose looked at her mother. Then she opened her mouth and said in a voice that was small and rusty from disuse but entirely her own, "Clara." The name sat in the room. Evelyn looked at her daughter. Cole looked at Rose. Rose was looking at the baby, whose hand was still wrapped around her finger, her face with that expression, that unnameable, rearranged thing. "Clara," Evelyn said. "Yes." Cole stepped back until he was in the hallway, because he needed a moment, and the hallway was where he could have it. He stood there in the dark with the sleet going at the windows, and the sound of the fire from the kitchen, and the small sounds from the room behind him, and he stood there for a while. Outside, the sleet was turning to snow. Through the small window at the end of the hall, he could see it coming down differently now, softer, slower, the way snow moves when it's replaced the rain completely and settled in. The lane was going white. The yard was going white. The burned corner of the barn was going white. He went back to the kitchen and put more wood on the fire and put water on to heat, and stood at the window and watched the snow come down over his land. And after a while the sky started going gray with the beginning of morning. Clara was about 4 hours old when Gideon Hart's man arrived. Cole heard the horse before he saw it. One rider, coming fast up the lane in the new snow, which was already 3 inches and still falling. He went to the door. The man who pulled up was not someone Cole recognized. Young, hard-faced, in a long coat with a folded paper in his hand. "Cole Mercer," the man said. "That's me." The man held out the paper. "From the office of Judge Abraham Reeves. You've been served." Cole took the paper. He didn't open it in front of the man. "Anything else?" "No, sir." The man turned his horse and went back down the lane, and Cole stood in the doorway with snow falling on his shoulders and the folded paper in his hand, and listened to the hoofbeats fade. He went back inside. He stood at the kitchen table and opened the paper and read it. His reading was slow but thorough, and when he'd finished, he read it again to be sure he'd gotten it right. Then he set it down and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he went and stood in the doorway of Evelyn's room. She was awake. Clara was asleep against her side. Rose was curled at the foot of the bed, also asleep, still wearing her dress, which was going to be wrinkled past saving. Evelyn looked at Cole's face and then at the paper in his hand. "What is it?" He came in and gave it to her. She read it with Clara asleep against her, and her face went through several things before it settled. "He's challenging the Holt Road deed," she said. "He's claiming you don't own this property, that the original purchase was fraudulent?" "Allegedly," Cole said. "According to that, the man who sold me this place 7 years ago didn't have clear title to it, which would mean my deed is invalid." "Is it true?" "I don't know," Cole said. "I bought it in good faith. The title was clear at the time, as far as the county office said." He paused. "But if someone went looking for a problem and had a judge willing to look the right way..." She held the paper and looked at it and then at him. "He wants the land." "He doesn't want the land. He wants us off the land." "Cole." She said his name the way she did when she needed him to see something clearly and not sideways. "If he gets a ruling that your deed is invalid, you lose the ranch. Everything." She paused. "He's not just coming after me anymore. He's coming after everything you have." The snow was still coming down. Through the window, the lane was erasing itself. Clara made a small sound in her sleep and resettled, and the sound was so ordinary and so new that both of them looked at her for a moment before they could look at each other again. "I know," Cole said. "What are we going to do?" He looked at the paper in her hands and at his sleeping daughter. He thought it, clearly and without alarm, in those words, his daughter, and at the snow outside and at Evelyn, who was watching him with the clear-eyed attention she always gave things she needed to understand completely. "We're going to fight it," he said. She held his gaze. "How?" "I don't know yet," he said. "But I'm not losing this land, and I'm not losing this family." He said the last word without planning to, and it sat in the room without either of them moving, and then he said, "Let me think." She nodded. She handed him back the paper, and he took it and folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. Behind him, from the foot of the bed, Rose stirred. She opened her eyes and looked at Cole standing in the doorway, and then she looked at her mother, and then she looked at Clara, asleep beside her mother, and the expression on her face said, plainly, without language, "These are the people I'm staying with." Cole put his hand briefly on the doorframe, not a gesture anyone would have noticed or named, and went back to the kitchen to think. The petition sat on the kitchen table for 2 days while Cole thought. He wasn't a man who moved fast on problems he didn't fully understand yet. He'd learned that the hard way, years back, when he'd made a decision about a land purchase in a hurry and spent the following 18 months untangling it. So he read the petition again, and he wrote down the specific claims in his own rough handwriting on a separate piece of paper so he could look at them stripped of the legal language. Claim 1. The original seller of the Holt Road property, a man named Vernon Galt, had not held clear title at the time of sale. Claim 2. The property had been part of a contested boundary survey in 1871, predating Cole's purchase by 4 years, and that contest had never been formally resolved. Claim 3. As a result, Cole's deed was based on a flawed transaction and should be reviewed for validity. He looked at what he'd written. Then he went to the barn and saddled Pete and rode into Dry Creek. The county records office was a single room attached to the back of the land office on the main street. It smelled like paper and old wood and the particular damp of records that had been filed in a building without proper ventilation for 20 years. The man who ran it was named Fletcher, a thin, precise man in his 40s who wore the same green vest every day and regarded his filing system with the protective affection of a parent. Vernon Galt, Cole said. Holt Road property. 1876 sale. I need everything you have. Fletcher looked at him over his glasses. That's going back a ways. I know. Could take some time. I've got time, Cole said. He didn't particularly have time, but he sat in the hard chair Fletcher pointed him toward and waited. It took an hour and a half. Fletcher produced 3 folders, dusty enough that Cole had to keep himself from coughing when he opened the first one. He read through them carefully, page by page, the way he'd read the petition, looking for the thing he didn't know yet, the fact that would make the shape of everything else change. He found it in the second folder. It was a survey record from 1872, not 1871, And it wasn't a contested boundary, it was a resolution of one. A surveyor named Amos Pratt had been commissioned to resolve the Holt Road boundary dispute by the county, and his findings, recorded in neat columns, had been filed and approved by the county commissioner of that year. The dispute was settled. Galt's title had been confirmed by that resolution before Cole ever bought the place. The petition claimed the dispute had never been formally resolved. The petition was wrong, or the petition was lying. Cole sat with that paper in his hands and felt the specific satisfaction of finding the loose thread in an argument and knowing exactly where to pull. He asked Fletcher to make him a copy of the Pratt survey and the commissioner's approval. Fletcher did it with the painstaking care of a man for whom accuracy was a personal value. Cole paid him 50 cents and thanked him and rode home with the copies folded in his breast pocket. He laid them on the table that evening after supper, alongside the petition and the original deed, and explained it to Evelyn. She was sitting with Clara in the crook of one arm, nursing, with the ease of a woman doing something she'd done before. Rose was at the table with them, drawing on a piece of brown paper with a stick of charcoal Cole had found in the barn. She'd discovered she liked drawing, and did it with the same concentrated silence she brought to everything. Evelyn listened to Cole with her full attention. When he finished, she looked at the papers. The survey resolution was filed 12 years before Gideon's petition claims the dispute was unresolved, she said. Yes. He would have known that was there. He would have had to know it was there. You don't file a petition like this without researching the records. Either he knew and gambled that I didn't, or... Cole paused. Or someone told him the record could be made to disappear. She looked up from the papers. Fletcher. I don't think Fletcher. He's not that kind of man, and the record was right where it should have been, filed properly. Cole thought about it. But there are other people who move through that office, and Reeves has connections. Could the record be removed before the hearing? That's what I've been sitting here thinking about, Cole said. Which is why tomorrow morning I'm writing to Billings. She looked at him. That's 3 days. 2.5 if I push it. Cole. She shifted Clara slightly. You'd leave us here. Pitts will come over, he said. I'll ask him tonight. He's got 2 sons and they're both capable men. They'll stay on the property. He paused. And the rifle is where it always is. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her running through it, the logic, the risk on both sides of the equation. What's in Billings? She said. Calloway, he said. The lawyer who helped James file the deed, and the Billings County office where the original registration is. I want certified copies of everything James filed. The deed, the inheritance clause, the water right. I want them in my hand, stamped and official, before this goes to a hearing. He looked at her steadily. And I want Calloway to know there's a case, because if this goes in front of Reeves, I want a lawyer who knows the underlying documents and isn't beholden to anyone in this county. You saw it. Ma son. She absorbed this. Clara had fallen asleep against her, the way newborns do, suddenly and completely, like a lamp switched off. Evelyn looked at her for a moment and then back at Cole. What about the Pratt survey? She said. The resolution in Fletcher's files. I'm going to ask Fletcher to make a second copy tomorrow morning before I leave. One for me to take to Billings, one that stays with you in the lockbox. If someone tries to move that record before the hearing, they'll find it's already been certified and copied. He paused. Hard to make something disappear when 3 offices have copies of it. She was quiet. Evelyn, he said, this is the thread. This is how we beat him. Not with rifles, not by waiting him out. We beat him with his own lying. She looked at the petition on the table and at the Pratt survey beside it, and the expression on her face was the one she got when she'd run through a problem completely and come out the other side. Go, she said. Go to Billings. He left the next morning before light. Aldous Pitts came over with his 2 sons, as promised, and they settled in without ceremony. The elder son, Will, was 22 and had a quiet, watchful quality that Cole found reassuring. The younger, named Tom, was 18 and talked too much, but he could handle himself and he was good with the animals, which Rose approved of. She'd established this approval by following him to the barn on his first morning and watching him work with the expression of a very small, very serious inspector. Cole said goodbye to Evelyn at the door in the dark. Be careful, she said. It was plain, no decoration on it. I will be. He hesitated, There was something he wanted to say that he hadn't figured out the right shape for yet. He'd been carrying it around for a few weeks, the way you carry a stone in your pocket, aware of the weight without yet being ready to put it down. He settled for, "Don't open the door to anyone you don't know." "Cole," she said, with a flatness that said she was aware this was not what he'd been about to say. "I know." He rode out in the dark. The road to Billings in December was not a pleasant experience. The snow from Clara's birth night had packed down to ice on the northern stretches, and the wind had ideas about itself that made the open sections miserable. Cole rode Pete and led the gray, switching between them every few hours to spare their legs, and camped 2 nights on the road in cold that turned his breath to a visible cloud and kept him awake past what was useful. He got to Billings on the afternoon of the 3rd day, stiff and cold and badly in need of coffee. The Billings County office was nothing like Fletcher's small operation in Dry Creek. It was a proper building on a proper street, with a staff of 4 and a filing system that went back to territorial days. Cole explained what he needed and was told it would take until morning, which meant a night in a rooming house on a bed that was better than the ground and worse than home. He found Calloway's office on the town's main street, above a printer's shop. The stairs were narrow, and the door at the top had R.T. Calloway, attorney, painted on it in letters that had been touched up recently, which suggested the man was still practicing. He was. He was a compact, sandy-haired man somewhere in his late 50s, with the precise manner of someone who spent his professional life making sure the right words were in the right order. He looked at Cole when he came in with the evaluating attention of a man who'd had strangers arrive with problems before and had learned to read the nature of the problem quickly. Cole told him everything. He laid it out the way he'd laid it out for Evelyn, in order, without drama, just the facts in the sequence they'd happened. Calloway listened without interrupting, which Cole appreciated. When Cole was done, Calloway picked up a pen and made notes. "I remember James Hart," Calloway said. "I remember the filing clearly. He was very specific about the inheritance clause. He wanted Evelyn's name in the document, not the estate. He understood the distinction." He paused. "I was sorry to hear he'd died." "His brother is the problem," Cole said. "Gideon Hart." Calloway said the name with the particular tone of someone who has heard it before in an unflattering context. "I've heard the name in connection with some land matters in that county. He has a relationship with Reeves that goes back several years." "How bad is that relationship, realistically?" Calloway looked at him over his notes. "Reeves will not manufacture a ruling out of nothing. He's not that kind of corrupt. He's the kind that shades things, interprets generously in the direction of whoever he favors. But if you have solid documentation and a coherent argument, he can't simply ignore it. It would expose him." He paused. "The question is whether Gideon's petition has enough substance to give Reeves room to work with. The petition claims the boundary dispute was never resolved. I have the 1872 Pratt survey showing it was." Calloway wrote something. "That's significant. If the petition knowingly misrepresents the record, that's not just a weak case. That's an act of bad faith that a judge has to either acknowledge or become complicit in." He looked up. "Even Reeves has limits. So what do I need to walk into that hearing with? Certified copies of the Pratt survey, the commissioner's approval, your original deed, the Billings registration of the Hart property, because I expect he'll try to fold both properties into the same challenge. And my testimony, if you want it." He said this matter-of-factly, not as a favor. "I want it. My fee is $15 for preparation and $20 for the day of the hearing." Cole had $30 in his lockbox at home. "Done," he said. He picked up the certified copies from the county office the next morning, added them to the copies he'd already had Fletcher make, and started home. He pushed harder on the return, slept less, rode longer. He was back at the ranch in 2 days. The property looked the same as he'd left it. Will Pitts was splitting wood in the yard when Cole rode in. Tom was somewhere in the barn. Cole put the horses up and came inside and found Evelyn in the kitchen with Clara in a cloth sling across her front, stirring something on the stove. She turned when he came in. She looked at him, at his face first, reading it, and then at the saddlebag in his hand. "Did you get it?" she said. "All of it," he said. "Calloway's coming to the hearing." She let out a breath that had been held for 5 days. "When's the hearing?" "Reeves set it for the 17th. That's 9 days. She turned back to the stove. "Sit down," she said. "You look terrible." "Thank you." It's not a compliment. He sat down. Clara made a small sound from inside the sling, and Evelyn reached up and adjusted her without looking, and the movement was so unconscious and sure that Cole watched it for a second before he looked away. Rose appeared from the hallway. She looked at Cole with those dark eyes, and then at the saddlebag on the table, and then at her mother's back. "He's back," Evelyn said to the stove. "And it went well." Rose looked at Cole. He nodded. She considered this for a moment and then went and sat at the table across from him, drawing her charcoal and brown paper toward her, and began to draw something with the focused attention she brought to it. He looked at what she'd drawn on the previous page. It was the ranch. Recognizable. In the way a child's drawing is recognizable when the child has been looking at something long enough to understand its shape. The house, the barn, the corral fence, 2 horses, and 4 small figures standing in the yard, which he looked at for a while before he looked away. The next 9 days were a particular kind of tense. Gideon didn't come himself, but his presence was felt in the shape of 2 men who Cole spotted twice on the ridge above the north pasture, watching. He didn't confront them, no law against sitting on a ridge, but he made sure they could see him see them, which was its own kind of message. 2 days before the hearing, a man arrived from Gideon with a written offer. Cole read it at the kitchen table. It proposed that Cole sell the Holt Road property at a price 15% below its assessed value, and in exchange, Gideon would withdraw the petition and make no further legal challenges. Cole turned the paper over and wrote on the back, "No." He gave it back to the man and closed the door. Evelyn had watched from the kitchen. "What did it say?" he told her. "And you said no, obviously." She looked at him with an expression that was trying not to be what it was, and then gave up trying. "Good," she said. The hearing was held in the county courthouse in Dry Creek on a Thursday morning in mid-December. Cole and Evelyn arrived in the wagon, Clara in her sling, Rose sitting straight-backed in the wagon bed like a small dignitary. Calloway had arrived the night before and was waiting outside the courthouse when they pulled up, in a good coat with a leather case under his arm. The courtroom was a plain room with wooden benches and a raised desk for the judge. It smelled like wood stove smoke and old paper. About 20 people had come to watch. In a county this size, a land dispute of this nature was news, and people felt entitled to see it. Gideon was already there. He had his own lawyers, a man named Sutton from the county seat, whose suits were better than Calloway's, but whose expression suggested he'd rather be somewhere else. Gideon sat beside him at the respondent's table and looked at Cole when he came in with the composed expression of a man who has calculated that he's winning and is comfortable waiting for the confirmation. Then he saw Calloway. Something shifted in his face, brief, controlled. But there. He'd expected a rancher with a piece of paper. He'd gotten a rancher with a piece of paper and the lawyer who'd filed the original heart deed in Billings. Sutton leaned over and said something quiet to Gideon. Gideon said something back. Judge Reeves came in and everyone stood. Reeves was a heavy-set man in his 60s with a face like old leather, and he moved with the weight of a man who'd been deciding things for a long time and had gotten comfortable with it. He looked at both tables, and his expression gave away nothing. "We're here on the matter of the petition filed by Gideon Hart regarding the title of the Holt Road property," Reeves said. "Mr. Sutton, present your case." Sutton stood and presented the petition's argument in the organized, practiced manner of a lawyer who'd prepared well. He walked through the 1871 boundary dispute, cited the lack of resolution, and argued that Vernon Galt's title had been clouded at the time of sale to Cole Mercer, rendering the subsequent deed invalid. He was clear and he was competent, and if you didn't know about the Pratt survey, it sounded like a reasonable argument. Then Calloway stood. He was not a theatrical man. He didn't perform or embellish. He simply placed the documents in sequence on the table in front of Reeves and explained what each one was, in the specific language of land law that left no interpretive room. The 1872 Pratt survey, the county commissioner's approval, the certification from the Billings office confirming the filing date. The original Mercer deed purchased 4 years after the dispute resolution, and the Hart property registration in Billings, with the inheritance clause naming Evelyn specifically, which was relevant because, as Calloway explained in careful, deliberate language, any attempt to challenge the Hart deed would also need to address this registration, which predated Gideon's claim by 18 months and had been filed with full legal counsel. Reeves looked at the Pratt survey for a long time. Sutton stood and offered a response, which was weaker than his initial argument because the ground had shifted and they both knew it. He suggested that the survey resolution might have been improperly executed, which Calloway rebutted by producing the commissioner's signature and the registered date. And for a moment the courtroom had the particular quiet of people watching someone run out of road. Gideon said something to Sutton in a low voice. Sutton listened and then said quietly back, something that involved the word insufficient. Reeves set down the documents. He looked at both tables. The petition claims the 1871 boundary dispute was never formally resolved, he said. The record indicates otherwise. The Pratt Survey of 1872, filed and approved by the county commissioner of that year, constitutes a formal resolution of that dispute and confirms the title chain that led to Mr. Mercer's purchase in 1876. He paused. I find no basis in the petition's central claim. The deed stands. He said it plainly, without elaboration, in the manner of a man who has seen that the facts won't go the way someone wanted and has chosen, this time, to let the facts be what they are. Sutton gathered his papers. Gideon sat very still. Cole sat at the table across the room and looked at the surface of the wood in front of him and breathed. Calloway put his hand briefly on Cole's shoulder, a professional gesture, contained, and began gathering his own documents. Evelyn, sitting in the bench directly behind Cole, leaned forward. She didn't say anything. She just put her hand on his shoulder for a moment and then sat back. Clara, in her sling, slept through the whole thing. The room began to move. People stood and began to talk in the low voices that follow a verdict, parsing what they'd seen. Sutton spoke briefly to Reeves about the formal dismissal of the petition. Calloway was making notes. Cole turned around in his chair and looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him. Her face had the expression she got when something had resolved. Not elation, nothing so clean as that. Just the look of someone whose long, careful hold on a terrible tension has finally been allowed to ease. It's done, he said. Almost, she said. She was right. He turned back to the front of the room because Gideon was still there, and a man like Gideon doesn't conclude until he concludes himself. Gideon had stood up. He was looking at Cole across the room with the expression of someone who has run out of the moves he prepared and is now in a space he hadn't planned for. His lawyer was gathering papers and not looking at him. Cole stood up. They looked at each other across the courtroom with the noise of people leaving around them and the stove ticking in the corner and the winter light coming through the high windows. Cole crossed the room. He stopped a few feet from Gideon, close enough to speak quietly, and he looked at the man who had burned his barn and filed false claims and sent riders to watch his land and tried to dismantle everything by degrees. She's not an inheritance, Cole said. She never was. She was a person your brother loved and provided for, and he made sure she'd be taken care of after he was gone. You mistook that for property. He paused. And you spent the better part of a year making her life hard because you couldn't tell the difference. Gideon looked at him. Something moved in his face. The complicated, unreadable thing that Cole had seen the first day, that day on the porch. Up close, it resolved into something recognizable. Not love, whatever it had been had curdled past that long ago, but grief. The grief of a man who wanted something specific from the world and had been told repeatedly by the world that he could not have it, and who had never learned to sit with that. She needed protecting, Gideon said, quieter than Cole expected. She needed to be left alone, Cole said. Those are not the same thing. They never were. Gideon didn't respond to that. He looked past Cole for a moment, at Evelyn sitting with Clara in the bench, and then he looked back at Cole. Whatever that look cost him, Cole didn't have the capacity to feel sorry about it, but he saw it. The land case is done, Cole said. The petition is dismissed. My wife's property is hers and has been since James filed it. That's all the law and that's all the fact. He paused. Whatever else you feel about this situation is yours to carry, but carry it somewhere else. Gideon stood in the courtroom and looked at him for a long moment. The room was mostly empty now. Sutton had already left. The bailiff was adding wood to the stove in the corner with the complete disinterest of a man who had seen many conclusions and had opinions about none of them. You don't know what she was like before all this, Gideon said finally. It wasn't an argument. It was something else, something that had nowhere left to go. Maybe not, Cole said, but I know what she is now. There was nothing after that. Gideon picked up his coat from the back of the chair and walked toward the door, and his footsteps on the wood floor were the only sound in the room. And then the door closed behind him, and Cole stood in the middle of the empty courtroom and listened to the silence that followed. He turned around. Evelyn was watching him. Clara was awake in her sling, looking around at the ceiling with the unfocused curiosity of a baby discovering that the world is very large. Rose was sitting beside her mother, her charcoal and brown paper on the bench beside her. She'd been drawing through the entire hearing, and Cole decided that this was probably the healthiest response anyone in the room had managed. He walked back across the courtroom and sat down on the bench beside Evelyn. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "He won't be back," Cole said finally. She considered this. "You don't know that." "I know the look of a man who's run out," he said. "I've seen it before." She was quiet, looking at the front of the room where Reeves had delivered the ruling, at the desk and the documents that were still stacked there waiting to be filed away. "It's strange," she said. "What is?" "I've been afraid of this for so long, of him, of what he'd do next, that I don't quite know what to do with it being over." She paused. "It doesn't feel like I thought it would." "How did you think it would feel?" She thought about that honestly. "Bigger," she said. "Louder." She looked at Clara. "But she's been asleep through most of it, and Rose is drawing a picture of the stove, and you look like you need a meal and a night's sleep, and it just feels like the day after something, not the something itself." "That's what winning usually feels like," Cole said. She looked at him sideways. "Spoken like a man who's won before." "Not often," he said, "but enough to know the shape of it." Rose held up her drawing. It was the courtroom. Recognizable in the way all her drawings were recognizable. The bench, the desk at the front, the high windows, and 4 figures in the scene, the same 4 figures that had been in the ranch drawing. The grouping was the same, the spacing was the same. Cole looked at it for a long moment. "Good likeness," he said. Rose looked at him with those dark eyes, very serious, and then she folded the paper carefully and put it in her coat pocket, which was where she put things she intended to keep. They stayed in the bench a little while longer, the 4 of them, in the empty courtroom in the thin December light, and nobody felt the need to move immediately, and Clara fell back asleep. And outside the window, the sky was doing what the Montana winter sky does in the afternoons, turning the particular shade of blue that's almost white, the color of cold made visible. After a while, Evelyn said, "I'd like to go home." "Yes," Cole said. They got up and gathered their things and went out into the cold. The ride home from Dry Creek took an hour and a half, and nobody talked much. That wasn't unusual for them. They'd gotten comfortable with the silences between them, the way you get comfortable with the particular creaks of a house you've lived in long enough to stop hearing them. But this silence had a different quality to it. Not the held breath quiet of waiting for something bad, which had been the texture of every day for the past 2 months. Something looser. Something that didn't quite know what shape to take now that it no longer had to hold itself tight against the next problem. Cole drove and watched the road. The sky had gone that flat white blue of late December afternoons, the kind that makes the snow look almost warm. Evelyn sat beside him with Clara in her sling and Rose pressed against her other side, all 3 of them arranged under the blanket he'd put across the seat that morning. He could feel the warmth of them from where he sat. He thought about Gideon walking out of the courtroom, the sound of those footsteps, the door closing. He'd meant what he said. He believed it had the look of an ending, a man who'd run out of moves and knew it. But he also knew that belief and fact were different things, and he wasn't going to let the property go unwatched for a while yet. He'd keep the rifle where it was. He'd keep his eyes on the lane in the mornings. That was just sense. But somewhere underneath the sense, something had shifted. He didn't examine it immediately. He was the kind of man who let things settle before he looked at them directly. He filed it away and drove the wagon home. They got back to the ranch in the late afternoon, the low sun cutting sideways across the yard and making long shadows of the fence posts. Aldous Pitts's sons were still there, Will in the barn, Tom splitting the last of the wood Cole had been meaning to get to all week. Tom looked up when the wagon came in and gave a short nod, which was his version of a greeting, and went back to the wood. "Go on inside," Cole said to Evelyn. "It's cold." "I'm aware," she said, in the tone that meant she was going to go inside when she was ready, and not before. But she went. Clara still in the sling, Rose jumping down from the wagon with the rubber-limbed ease of a child who doesn't think about landings. Cole unhitched the horses and put them up and paid Will and Tom what he owed them and thanked Pitts's family for the loan of his sons, which Pitts would hear when the boys got home. He did all of it in the methodical way he did things at the end of a day. Not slow, not hurried, just deliberate. Then he went inside. The kitchen was warm. Evelyn had the stove going and a pot of something on. She'd put it on this morning before they left. One of the long cooking things she'd started doing now that she had the range of the kitchen properly. Clara was in the small wooden cradle Cole had made from scrap lumber 2 weeks ago. Lumpy and imprecise but functional, and she was awake, doing what she did when she was awake, which was look at the ceiling with the concentrated intensity of someone reading something written there. Rose was at the table with her charcoal and paper again. Cole sat down. He didn't mean to just sit there, but he did. He sat down at the kitchen table in his coat and put his hands flat on the wood and looked at them, and for a moment the full weight of the last 3 months sat in the room with him. The auction square in Dry Creek, the broken wagon wheel, the barn burning in the dark, the riders on the ridge, the courtroom, the document, the look on Gideon's face, all of it stacked up behind the ordinary fact of sitting in his kitchen at the end of the day. He hadn't let himself feel any of it while it was happening. He'd needed his hands free. Evelyn came and set a cup of coffee in front of him. She didn't say anything. She went back to the stove. He wrapped his hands around the cup and let the warmth come through. After a while, he said, "I want to take a look at the Hart property, the 68 acres. Evelyn turned. "Why?" "Because it's yours and I've never seen it, and I'd like to know what we're working with." He paused. "Springtime, when the roads are passable. Just to see it." She looked at him for a moment. "It's not much," she said. "The house is gone. Gideon stripped it after James died, but the land is good. The water right on the eastern creek is worth something." "I know it is." "Cole." She came and sat down across from him. "Are you thinking about consolidating?" "I'm thinking about the future," he said, "which is something I haven't been able to think about for a while because I was too busy managing the present." He looked at the table. The Hart parcel and the Holt Road parcel together. That's close to 230 acres with 2 water rights. That's a real operation. She was quiet, looking at him. "We don't have to decide anything now," he said. "I'm just thinking out loud." "You never think out loud," she said. "You think in private, and then you tell me what you've decided." He considered this. "Is that a complaint?" "It's an observation." She paused. "I'm thinking out loud too. What you're describing, that would mean building something, not just holding on." "Yes." "Not just surviving." "Yes." She looked at the table at the coffee cup in his hands. She had the expression she got when she was being honest with herself about something, and the honesty was arriving somewhere she hadn't been sure she'd get to. "I'd like that," she said, quietly, like she wasn't entirely sure she was allowed to want it yet. "So would I," he said. They sat across from each other in the kitchen with the stove going and Clara in her cradle and Rose drawing, and the day folding into evening around them, and nobody moved to light the lamp yet. Winter settled in hard after that. January in Montana is not a month that concerns itself with your comfort or your plans. The snow came down and packed and came down again, and the temperature dropped to the kind of numbers that make the air feel solid. Cole worked the property through it the way he always had, methodically, without complaint, putting one foot down in front of the other on the days when that was all that was available to him. The fences needed checking after every major snowfall. The animals needed tending twice daily without exception. The barn roof held, which was a relief, and the new south corner held too, the fresh lumber tight against the cold. Evelyn kept the house. That was a simplification of what she actually did, which was run the domestic half of the operation with the same practical intelligence she brought to everything. She managed the food stores and the fuel and the baby's needs and Rose's particular needs and the cleaning and the mending and the cooking, and she did it without making any of it seem like a performance of virtue. It was just what needed doing, and she did it. They worked alongside each other that winter, and what happened, quietly, without announcement or ceremony, was that the space between them changed shape. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody said anything specific at a particular moment that marked a before and after. It was more like the way ice goes in spring, not all at once, but imperceptibly. day by day, until one morning you look and it's gone, and the ground underneath is different than you remembered. Cole noticed things, small things that accumulated into something larger than any one of them. He noticed that he'd started leaving room for her in his thinking, not just logistically, not just what does Evelyn need and what are her circumstances, but her actual opinion on things. What she'd say about the fence posts along the North Ridge, what she'd say about Calloway's fee. He'd catch himself mid-thought formulating something and realize he was already imagining her response, already factoring it in, which meant somewhere along the way her judgment had become part of how he thought. He noticed that she laughed occasionally now. Not often, and not at grand things. At Gerald's permanent sense of injury, at Tom Pitt's who talked too much and couldn't help it, at Clara's opinions about bath time, which were very clear and very negative. The laugh was low and came and went quickly, like she was still rationing it, still getting used to having enough room in her days to allow it. But it was there. He noticed that on the nights when Clara woke at 2 or 3 and needed tending, he heard Evelyn in the next room, her voice low and steady, and he'd lie in his own room in the dark and listen for when it stopped and feel something settle when it did. Not just relief that the baby was quiet, something else. He didn't examine it immediately. He let it settle. February came in worse than January and then broke early, a week of strange warmth in the middle of the month that turned everything to mud and then froze again. Cole was out in that freeze checking the east fence when he found the post. He almost missed it. He was moving along the line, checking each post in the methodical way, and this one looked right at first, upright, solid, the wire taut on either side. But when he put his weight on it, testing, it gave in a specific way that wasn't weather damage. He crouched down and looked at the base. Someone had cut partway through it. Clean cut, not a break. Low on the post, below the snow line, where it wouldn't be visible until the snow shifted. He stood up slowly and looked along the fence line in both directions. Checked the next 3 posts east and the next 2 west. Clean, just this one. He stood there in the cold with his gloves in one hand and looked at the damaged post and thought about what it meant. It could have been old damage, found and not repaired by the previous owner. It could be a lot of things, but it was a clean cut. He replaced the post that afternoon, working in the cold with the deliberate focus of a man doing something he doesn't like having to do. He checked the full perimeter of the east fence before dark, and then the north fence the next morning. He didn't find anything else. That evening, he told Evelyn. She listened. Her face didn't change much, but her hands, wrapped around her coffee cup, tightened briefly. "Gideon," she said. "Maybe. You said he'd run out of moves." I said he looked like it. He met her eyes. "I could be wrong." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Or it could be old damage." "It could be. But you don't think so." "I don't know," he said. "I'm not going to pretend certainty I don't have." He paused. "What I do know is that the post is replaced. I'm watching the fences, and if there's anything else, we'll find it." He looked at her. "We've dealt with worse than a fence post." She held his gaze, then she exhaled slowly. "Yes," she said, "we have." Nothing else came. March arrived and the snow began its slow retreat, and no other fences were damaged, and no riders appeared on the ridge, and no papers arrived from any county office. Cole kept watching the lane in the mornings, but with decreasing urgency. The way you keep checking on a wound you're confident is healing. After a while, you check out of habit rather than fear. Springtime came the way it comes in Montana, argumentatively, 2 steps forward and 1 step back, warm days interrupted by late snowfalls that didn't last. But by April, the creek was running full and loud, and the cottonwoods along the east bank were putting out their first tentative leaves, and Cole stood at the creek one morning watching it and thought about 230 acres with 2 water rights and what a real operation looked like. He thought about the auction square in Dry Creek. He thought about the broken wagon wheel that had put him there. A cracked spoke and a dry-rotted wheel, which he'd noticed 2 weeks before and told himself he'd get to, and hadn't. He thought of it as bad luck, in the moment. He'd been trying to figure out what to think of it since. He didn't land on anything neat. Life, in his experience, didn't hand you neat interpretations. It handed you events and left you to make what sense of them you could. The wheel cracked. He ended up in the square. He spent $22 he couldn't afford, and 3 months later he was standing at his own creek in the spring morning thinking about the future. Whether that was luck or consequence, or just the way things go was not a question he was going to answer definitively. He went back to the house. Rose had been in the barn since before breakfast. She'd appointed herself the primary caretaker of the horses, a role that Pete had accepted graciously and the Gray had accepted with more conditions. She'd also, sometime in March, started talking again. Not all at once. It came back the way it had left, in pieces. A word here, a short sentence. Her voice was still careful, like she was testing the weight of each thing before she said it. But it was there. And Evelyn cried the first time it happened, and didn't apologize for it, and Cole went outside and fixed a fence post that didn't need fixing for about 20 minutes. One evening in late April, Cole came in from checking the north pasture and found Evelyn sitting on the porch in the last of the light. Clara was in her lap, awake and looking at the yard with the proprietary attention she'd developed, which gave Cole the impression she was already forming opinions about what she'd eventually do with the place. Rose was somewhere in the barn. The gray horse was visible at the corral fence, his head up, catching the evening air. Cole sat down in the other chair. They watched the light go off the cottonwoods and the shadows get long across the yard. The creak was audible. Somewhere on the eastern ridge, a bird was making an announcement about something. After a while, Evelyn said, "I want to tell you something." "All right." She looked at Clara in her lap, at the baby's round face turned up toward the fading sky. "When you bid at the auction, when you said 22, I was watching your face." Cole looked at her. "I didn't know you," she said. "I had no idea what you were. I'd seen men do things from worse motives than they let on. James was good, but I'd seen enough to know that good men were the exception and not the rule." She paused. "I was watching your face for, I don't know, the angle on it, the calculation." "What did you see?" "Nothing," she said. "I mean that literally. There was nothing to read. You just did it." She looked at him now. "I didn't know what to do with that. I'd been afraid of men who wanted something from me, and then I met one who apparently didn't, and that was somehow harder to trust." He didn't say anything. He was listening. "I've been thinking about why you did it," she said. "That morning, why you went up to the platform and opened your wallet for two strangers." "I've thought about it too," he said. "And?" He looked out at the yard. The gray was still at the fence. He'd never named the horse. It had started to feel like a thing he'd left undone for too long to fix. He'd been thinking about that lately. "I don't have a clean answer," he said. "I'd like to say it was purely decent impulse. Maybe it was, but I'd been alone a long time and I was tired of it. And something in that square, the way people were laughing, it made me angry enough to do something about it." He paused. "So there's the decent part and there's the angry part. They both went in." She looked at him for a moment. "That's a more honest answer than I expected." "I try." "I know you do." She shifted Clara in her lap. "I want to tell you something else, and I want to say it plainly because that's the only way I know how to do it." "Go ahead." "What we started as, what this was when we got married in Webb's office in Heron, that's not what it is anymore." She said it simply, not as a romantic declaration, not as something she'd been building to dramatically, just as a statement of fact she'd arrived at and was now reporting. "I don't know exactly when it changed. I think it changed slowly enough that I missed the moment, but I know what it is now." Cole looked at her. "I love this place," she said. "I love what we're building here, and I love—" She stopped, took a breath. "I love you. That's what I want to say plainly." The bird on the ridge had gone quiet. The creek kept going. Cole sat in his chair and looked at the woman across from him, who had stood on an auction platform with her chin up and her daughter at her side and not looked away, who had wrapped his burned arm in the kitchen after he ran into a fire, who had given him the small, serious nod in a courtroom doorway that meant she was choosing to stay, who had said, "I'm not collapsing into this," with a clarity he'd thought about more than once since, and he felt the thing he'd been filing away all winter arrive at the front of his chest where he couldn't ignore it anymore. "I know," he said. "I know you do." He paused. "And I've been trying to figure out how to say the same thing without it coming out like something from a dime novel." She made the sound, the almost laugh, the precursor. "How's that going?" "Poorly," he said. "So I'll just say it. I love you. I've been in it for a while, and I didn't know how to hand it to you without making it into something uncomfortable because of the arrangement we started with." "The arrangement we started with is done," she said. Yes. What we have now is different. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment, and the last of the light was going gold on everything, and Clara was blinking slowly in her lap, working toward sleep. And from the barn came the sound of Rose talking to Pete in the low, steady murmur she'd developed, her voice patient and clear. Good, Evelyn said. That was all. Just the word, with the particular quality she gave to words she meant completely. He reached across the space between the chairs and put his hand over hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. Her hand turned under his and held it, the way it had in the courtroom. Not tight, not dramatic, just sure. They sat on the porch until the light was gone. Summer came and the ranch worked the way a ranch works, when the people on it know what they're doing and are doing it together. Cole took Evelyn and Rose out to the Hart property in June, as he'd said he would. They rode out on a clear morning, Clara in her carrier on Evelyn's back, Rose on a gentle mare Cole had traded for in the spring. The 68 acres on the Connolly Road was a quieter piece of land than Cole's, lower and greener, with the creek running along the east edge bright in the summer sun. The house was gone, as Evelyn had said, stripped to the foundation, which was stone and still sound. The outbuildings were mostly standing. The northern strip was overgrown with summer grass, and you could see standing there exactly what it meant. The natural corridor to the plateau, the only reasonable road through. They stood in the grass and looked at the land. It's good ground, Cole said. James thought so. She was looking at the stone foundation. He was going to build a proper house eventually. He always had plans. We could build on it, Cole said, or we could run cattle across both parcels and use the northern strip for the access road we'd eventually need for the plateau grazing. He looked at her. That's your call. It's your land. She looked at the foundation for a long moment. Then she looked at the creek and at the grass and at the sky. Let it run, she said. Let the cattle run on it. Let it be working land. She paused. James would have liked that better than a monument. Cole nodded. Rose had gotten down from the mare and was standing at the edge of the creek with her boots off, her feet in the water, apparently unconcerned with the temperature. Clara, on Evelyn's back, had developed an interest in Evelyn's hair and was working on it with the investigative thoroughness she brought to everything within reach. He was a good man, Evelyn said. Not to Cole specifically, just to the heir to the land that still had his name on it, even though the name was changing. Sounds like it, Cole said. He'd have liked you, she said. You're both stubborn in the same way, the useful kind. High praise. Don't let it go to your head. He didn't smile right away, but then he did, which was his way. The smile that came a beat late and meant more because it didn't come easily. They rode home in the late afternoon with the sun behind them and the shadows running long ahead of them on the road, and Rose talked from her mare in the conversational way she'd recovered. Not constantly, not in the flood that Evelyn had described from before her father died, but in the measured way of someone choosing words with some care, which gave what she said a particular weight. She talked about Pete and about a book Cole had found in the bottom of a trunk that she'd taken over, and about whether Gerald was going to be nicer next year, which Cole told her was unlikely but possible, which seemed to satisfy her. They passed the spot on the north road where the wagon wheel had cracked, though there was nothing there to mark it, just a stretch of road like any other stretch of road, the ground where a bad Tuesday had turned into something else. Cole didn't point it out, but he saw it as they passed, and he thought about it for a moment, and then he let it go. That autumn, Rose started school. There was a schoolhouse in Heron, 2 days a week, run by a woman named Mrs. Aldridge, who had strong opinions about reading and arithmetic and relatively few opinions about anything else, which Cole considered ideal. He drove Rose in on the first morning in September, just the two of them, because Evelyn had Clara and the mare was being difficult, and it worked out that way. Rose sat beside him on the wagon seat with her back straight and her hands in her lap and a reader in her bag, which was a cloth bag Evelyn had made from flour sacking. She looked at the road ahead of them with the solemn attention she'd always given to things she took seriously. "You'll be all right," Cole said. He'd said it because it seemed like the thing to say, and then immediately wondered if she needed saying it, because Rose had never given him much evidence of being a person who needed reassurance. She looked at him. "I know," she said, with complete confidence and no particular warmth, which he found reassuring in its own way. He dropped her at the schoolhouse and waited until he saw her go through the door. Mrs. Aldridge was inside. He could see her through the window, at the front of the room. Rose sat in the third row and opened her reader before the teacher had finished settling the other children, which Cole figured told you most of what you needed to know. He drove home. Evelyn was in the yard when he got back, hanging washing in the October wind. Clara was in the grass nearby, sitting up with the broad-based stability of a baby who had recently discovered she could sit without falling and was extremely pleased about this. Cole came across the yard and picked up the end of the sheet Evelyn was fighting with, which kept going at her in the wind, and held it while she pinned it. "How was she?" Evelyn asked. "Fine," he said. "Better than fine. She sat down and opened her book before the class started." Evelyn's face did the thing it did when Rose surprised her, which was less and less often now. Of course she did. She reached for another pin. She's been waiting for school since she found out it existed. "She's going to be trouble for that teacher," Cole said. "She's going to be wonderful for that teacher," Evelyn said, in the tone that meant the matter was closed. They finished the washing in the wind, the two of them working together the way they'd worked through that winter, without instruction or ceremony, just each picking up the other end of what needed doing. Clara, in the grass, had developed an interest in a particular patch of dirt and was investigating it with both hands. She was, Cole thought, already a different kind of person than Rose. Louder, more immediately physical, more interested in the texture of the world than its shape. She'd be trouble in a different way than Rose. He was already looking forward to it. He thought sometimes about the auction square, about the 40 people who had watched two human beings offered up like unwanted furniture and found it no more notable than a grain sale. He didn't have a clean feeling about it. He'd never been a person who could wrap his anger in philosophy and make it tidy. The anger was still there, at the back of things, but it wasn't useful to carry on the surface. What he'd come to understand, slowly, over the year, in the way he came to understand things, was that choice is the thing, not circumstance, not luck, not fate, not the accident of a dry-rotted wheel. The wheel cracked, and he could have left the wagon, gotten a new one next week, gone on about his day. 1,000 other men would have. He hadn't. And Evelyn had chosen, on a platform in front of 40 people who'd written her off, to keep her eyes open and her head up and let herself be seen. And Rose had chosen, in a burned barn in the dark, to sit in the dirt next to a man she'd known for 3 weeks and lean against his arm. All of those choices could have gone differently. Most of them could have gone worse. But they hadn't. He didn't call that luck. He didn't have a better word for it. He just called it how it went, and he was grateful for it in the way he was grateful for things he'd learned not to take for granted. The creek running clear, the fence holding through a hard winter, the horses healthy, the roof sound, the things that could fail and had not. One evening in late November, a year and a handful of weeks from the day the wagon wheel cracked, Cole and Evelyn sat on the porch in the cold. This was a thing they'd started doing in the fall, bundled against the weather, just sitting outside in the last of the light before dark. Rose had decided this was a good tradition and had inserted herself into it, wrapped in a blanket on the porch floor with a book and a lamp until the cold drove her back inside. Clara was already in bed. The yard was dark beyond the porch light. The creek was frozen along the edges but still running in the middle. The barn was solid and warm, the animals were in for the night, and the south corner had weathered the first storms of the season without complaint. Rose closed her book. She looked out at the dark yard for a moment, and then she looked up at Cole. "Papa," she said. She'd started saying it in October. The first time she'd said it, she'd been asking him to pass something at the table and said it without apparent intention or weight, just as the word she'd arrived at, and then looked at him after she'd said it with the expression of someone who has chosen a word and is checking whether it fits. He'd said yes, and passed what she'd asked for, and they'd both let it settle. Now she said it the same way she said everything, directly, with the particular weight of someone who didn't use words without meaning them. "What?" Cole said. "Is Gerald going to be nicer next year?" Cole considered this seriously. "No," he said. "I don't think Gerald is capable of change at this point in his life." Rose absorbed this. "That's sad." "It is a little." "Maybe if we got him a companion," she said. "A companion," Cole said. "For Gerald. Another goat. So he has something of his own." Cole looked at Evelyn. Evelyn was looking at the yard with an expression that meant she was not going to help him with this. "I'll think about it," he said, which was the answer you gave when you meant to eventually agree, but needed to arrive there at your own pace. Rose seemed satisfied. She picked up her book again. After a while, she went inside, the screen door closing behind her with the particular sound it always made. The sound Cole had heard every evening for a year now, the sound of the house receiving people back into itself. Evelyn leaned her shoulder against his. He put his arm around her and she settled against him, and they sat in the cold on the porch of the house they'd built together from a legal arrangement and a broken wagon wheel and a year of refusing to stop, and looked out at the dark land that was theirs. Gerald's going to be insufferable if we get him a companion, Cole said. Evelyn said. He'll think his methods have been validated. They have been, somewhat. That's a dangerous precedent. She turned her face up to look at him, and in the porch light her expression had all the things in it that he'd learned to read over the course of a year. The sharpness and the patience and the humor that came and went so fast you could miss it if you weren't watching. Cole, she said. What? Get the goat. He looked at her. She looked back at him. All right, he said. The cold was real, and the night was clear, and the creek ran under its frost at the edge of the yard, and the mountains to the west had been white for a month. Inside the house, Rose was already back in her book. Claire slept in her cradle in the room at the back. The gray horse, who Cole had finally named in September, after 2 years of avoidance, on a morning when he'd looked at the animal and thought he deserved a name regardless of whether Cole had planned to keep him, the horse was Silas now, and seemed to find the name acceptable, was inside with Pete. The two of them settled for the night. This was what they had. Not a story that had gone smoothly, not a year without damage. The barn had burned, the money had gotten tight. The judge had almost ruled the wrong way. The fence post had been cut. Not people without their flaws. Cole still thought in private and came out with decisions, which Evelyn still found maddening. Evelyn still moved through fear by working harder than necessary, which was not always the right tool for the problem. Rose was 7 and already stubborn enough to argue with a goat. Clara was 11 months and had, according to all available evidence, opinions about everything. Not perfect, not smooth, not the way it would have been written if someone had been writing it toward a clean ending. But true. All of it true. And solid under the feet, the way the ground is solid in spring after the last frost breaks. Uncertain at the edges, firm at the center, getting firmer. That was enough. That was, in Cole Mercer's considered opinion, more than enough. He sat on the porch with his wife in the cold and looked out at his land, and the night came down over the Montana frontier, and the creek ran, and the mountains stood, and nothing about any of it was simple, and all of it was real, and he was not done. He was, if anything, just getting started.
Post your link again with like what your discount code is, and I'll be happy to pin that message for folks. Hello, Lissa. How's it going? Welcome in. Hope you're doing well. But yeah, I try to go to Darren Devon's channel when I can. Sometimes the energy is more than I can handle, and that's just because it's usually during the early mornings for me because I'm on the West Coast and I have this like I'm not a morning person. Let me put it that way. I don't have a PP discount because I've already have all my handmade items 50%. Oh, that's amazing. Well, congrats on the 10 years of Albatross being in Anchored Albatross being in business. That is fucking phenomenal that you're doing 50% off. Okay, I get that. Well, fuck yeah. Many congrats. That's a hella discount. Damn. Yeah, if anyone would like to get some handmade pieces, some wood burning, some amazing pieces that you have on there, please go check out Anchored Albatross. It's pinned at the top of chat. So I peopled out, but I'm fine. Hell's life. Mood. That's a fucking mood, even though I'm an extrovert. Like sometimes I get peopled out too. Because here's the thing, what confused me what confused me for the longest time is that it was my autism, because I have an ADHD, and all you have is that a Zach emote? Yes, it's a Zach love. Yes. Love it. I love Zach. We love Zakayla over here. She's amazing.